Chapter 47. The group guessed that the two corpses had either been eaten by the lions or disposed of by Pei Zio and the others, so they didn't pay too much attention to it. Enduring their exhaustion and hunger, they exited the valley. Otherwise, when night fell, they wouldn't be able to leave again. Lin Qingxue was a little chubby, so Zhui Feng carried her while Yun Ruoyan and Lin Qingchen took turns carrying Zhuolin. However, when Yun Ruoyan carried Zhuolin on her back, she was still shocked by how light she was. Yun Ruoyan had always thought that Zhui Feng was simply full of energy when he carried Zhuolin on his back, but it wasn't just that. Carrying Zhuolin felt as if she were carrying an empty sack, without any pressure at all. There were fewer magical beasts in the valley than there had been the day before, and when they passed by the corpses of the low-rank beasts, none of them wanted to dig for their cores anymore. On one hand, they were in a hurry, and on the other, they had already seen better treasures, so these corpses were no longer of interest to them. In the afternoon, the group finally exited the valley and found a place near the water to set up camp. The past few days of battle had left them exhausted, but the rewards they had reaped made it all worth it. Furthermore, they had all gained quite a bit of training from the battles. The one who had benefited the most was Yun Ruoyan. She had finally broken through the bottleneck caused by the poison in her body, advancing from a 3rd rank to a 4th rank blade master. She believed that as long as she passed this hurdle, coupled with the abundant spiritual energy in her bracelet, her future cultivation would be even smoother. Before they knew it, they had already spent 7 days in the imperial territory. Tomorrow they would have to return. If they avoided the battles, 3 days would be more than enough for them to reach the exit. All of them felt that 10 days of training was far too short. If they could, they wouldn't mind another 10 days. But the rules of the game were set and they had to abide by them. After making arrangements for Zhuolin and Lin Qingxue, Zhui Feng was in charge of hunting and cooking, while Lin Qingchen and Yun Ruoyan went to the riverbank to fetch some water to make some soup. They had been eating barbecued meat for the past few days. Although Zhui Feng's cooking skills were impeccable, no matter how tasty something was, they would eventually get sick of it. After filling up their flasks, the two of them looked at the cool and clear stream water and suddenly felt itchy all over their bodies. For the past few days he had either been running or fighting. His body had been drenched in sweat countless times, and there were many bloodstains on his clothes. The clothes were still bearable, but when they thought of their bodies, the two of them felt their hearts itch. "Sister Ruoyan," Lin Qingchen said sincerely, "I'd like to take a bath." Yun Ruoyan looked at her very sincerely and said, "Me too." The sisters looked at each other and smiled. Since they had decided to end the battle quickly, they didn't leave anyone to guard them. They were also afraid that Zhui Feng would suddenly appear, so they walked along the stream for a while. After finding a secluded place, the two of them eagerly took off their dirty clothes and went into the water to take a bath. Lin Qingchen was in the middle of washing Yun Ruoyan's back. When her fingers touched the skin on her back, she felt that it was white and soft and as smooth as silk. "Ruoyan, you're so pretty." Yun Ruoyan paused, then smiled bitterly. "You're just trying to comfort me, aren't you?" "No," Lin Qingchen hurriedly explained. "It's true. Big sister's back, shoulders, and neck are all so beautiful. If only you didn't have that birthmark on your face." Yun Ruoyan's face had been ruined by that birthmark, but it hadn't affected her development. Although she looked rather thin, the areas that should have been there were beginning to develop. Furthermore, she had been paying attention to her diet and exercise ever since her rebirth, and her originally malnourished body had already taken care of itself. Yun Ruoyan patted Lin Qingchen's hand and sighed. "Actually, this birthmark does have some benefits." "What benefits?" Lin Qingchen asked curiously. Yun Ruoyan lowered her head and looked at her reflection in the water. The birthmark was so red and swollen that half of her face looked a little out of shape. Looking at her ugly face, she slowly said, "It helps me see some people, some things clearly. It tells me what I should cherish and what I should give up." "Sister Ruoyan, I don't understand what you're saying." Lin Qingchen was still a little surprised. Although she was intelligent, there were some things that required experience to truly understand. "It's fine." Yun Ruoyan turned around and began scrubbing Lin Qingchen's back. "I hope that you'll never understand what I'm saying. I hope that you and Qingxue will always be carefree and happy, and that our Lin family will continue to prosper." As the two sisters spoke, a figure suddenly flashed by the shore. Yun Ruoyan immediately sensed it, and her hand paused in the middle of scrubbing Lin Qingxue's back. "What's the matter, Sister Ruoyan?" Lin Qingxue had also sensed Yun Ruoyan's abnormality. Yun Ruoyan continued scrubbing Lin Qingchen's back as she slowly whispered into Lin Qingchen's ear, "There's someone on the shore." Lin Qingchen furrowed her brows slightly and nodded slightly. Hold your breath with me. Xuanhuan suddenly yelled, Aya? Then she pulled Lin Qingchen into the water, pretending that they'd accidentally slipped and fallen. Help, help. They made a couple of pretentious cries and then, with a couple of pretentious flops, they were completely submerged. Dou Yao had been fetching water downstream, while Xuanhuan and Lin Qingchen were bathing upstream. Although they didn't make much noise, Dou Yao's ears were exceptionally sharp. He could faintly hear some movement upstream and he followed the sound. After turning a corner, he saw a picture of a beautiful woman bathing that caused his nose to bleed. The two beautiful backs that appeared rosy under the sunlight, as well as the silky black hair, seemed to carry a woman's fragrance even from afar. Dou Yao resisted the urge to have a nosebleed and hurriedly ducked into the bushes. Not far from the bushes, he discovered that there were clothes taken off by beautiful women, and he wanted to steal them. That way he would be able to watch the two beauties run around naked, and if their cultivations happened to be lower than his, he might even be able to satisfy his desires today. As he thought of this, he moved towards Xuanhuan and Lin Qingshua's clothes, his body rubbing against the bushes with a rustling sound. Xuanhuan keenly noticed him and thought, where did this reckless fellow come from? When I catch him later, I'll definitely dig his eyes out. Just as Dou Yao was about to take their clothes, the two beauties in the river suddenly flopped up, crying for help. Dou Yao was delighted that he'd gotten them without any effort, and he immediately stood up from the bushes. Suddenly, a streak of light flew over from somewhere and brushed past his scalp. Dou Yao felt a chill on his scalp, and the hair that he'd kept in place for 17 years fell off his head. Ah! He screamed in fright, and no longer caring about the beauties or his luck with women, he turned around and ran away. Humph, he runs faster than a rabbit. By the time Xuanhuan's head popped out of the water, Dou Yao had already disappeared. She retracted the Feilai blade, her anger stifling. Sister Ruoyan, let's go back up. Lin Qingchen's expression wasn't too good either. Although the women of the Qinyuan continent weren't exactly conservative, having their bodies peeped on for no apparent reason would still affect their moods. The two of them went ashore, put on their clothes and headed back to the campsite. Coincidentally, they bumped into Zhuo Yifeng, who was rushing over with 2 wild ducks in his hands. I heard you screaming for help just now. What happened? He asked anxiously. Nothing. Yun Ruoyan clasped her hands behind her back, her expression ugly. We ran into a big rat and we wanted to catch it to make soup, but it ran away. What bad luck. Zhuo Yifeng was a little confused, and he looked at Lin Qingchen with a puzzled expression. Yes, a big rat. Lin Qingchen lowered her head, and her expression didn't look too good either. She only replied gloomily before following behind Yun Ruoyan. Rat? Soup. Zhuo Yifeng looked at the wild ducks in his hands and muttered to himself, so that's what you guys like. Naturally, there wasn't any rat soup that night, but Zhuo Yifeng caught 2 fish from the stream and wild duck eggs from the forest to make a delicious fish soup with eggs. Coupled with the delicious roast duck, all of them had a satisfying meal. After Lin Qingxue ate her fill, she exclaimed that she was full of energy. All of them laughed in satisfaction after exhaustion. The next day they continued on their way back. Along the way they ran into a few other groups of people who had come to challenge them. Fortunately, none of them had intentionally provoked or tried to steal their treasures. However, a group of scions from the Guiz family in the capital asked Yun Ruoyan if they had seen a youth called Dou Yu, 16 or 17 years old, slender, and with a pair of prominent ears. When Lin Qingchen heard the description, she immediately frowned, but Yun Ruoyan calmly said that she hadn't seen him, but she made a mental note of this stinky rat called Dou Yu. Because of Zhuo Lin and Qiuqiu's presence, they were able to successfully avoid the attacks of a few magical beasts. 2 days later, they finally returned to the entrance of the imperial territory. After handing over their tokens to the guards, they successfully passed the trial and were told to return home and wait for the acceptance notice from Kongming Academy. They were still a little stunned that they had passed the trial so easily, and that Kongming Academy, which had seemed so far away, was now within reach. This was especially true for the Beastkin siblings. They had thought that they would be treated unfairly because of their identity as Beastkin, but everything seemed to have progressed much more smoothly than they had expected. Of course, what made them the happiest wasn't just that they had passed the trial, but that they had finally made friends with the 3 Yun sisters. In fact, this trial wasn't easy at all. More than half of those who had entered had given up halfway, and quite a few had lost their lives. Less than 100 had actually passed the trial. It was just that when they looked back at the trial after overcoming the dangers and difficulties, they felt as if it hadn't been so difficult after all. First miss, second miss, you're finally out. Lin Bo saw them from afar and hurriedly jumped down from his carriage. I've been waiting here for you for 3 days and I was so worried. Chapter 48. Uncle Lin was the Lin family steward, and he had watched the Lin sisters grow up. Not long ago, he had gone home to visit his family and hadn't sent them into the imperial territory. As soon as he returned, he had rushed over to pick them up. Oh, second miss, what's wrong? Uncle Lin asked as soon as he saw Lin Qingxue on Zhui Feng's back. I'm fine, Uncle Lin, just a small injury, Lin Qingxue replied with a smile. Lin Qingxue replied with a smile. Her complexion had already returned to normal, but her legs were still weak when she walked. Why are you so? Uncle Lin, is grandfather doing well? Yun Ruoyan interrupted Uncle Lin. Uncle Lin called out to Miss Biao and then said with a smile, Grandpa is fine. He was just worried about you guys, so he sent me here early to wait. Let's hurry back. I'm sure he'll be very happy to know that you've all passed the trial. Grandfather's the best at keeping his cool. Uncle Lin was worried about us, so he rushed here to wait for us. Lin Qingxue smiled. Second miss, I can't hide anything from you. Uncle Lin smiled. Yun Ruoyan looked all around her. She didn't see any carriages from the Yun family, and there weren't many carriages waiting at the entrance. Uncle Lin, have you seen my sisters? Yes, they arrived 2 days earlier than you, and they've already returned to the Yun manor. I even asked them about you. Yun Ruoyan couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. What did they say? They said that they were with you, but a magical beast separated you, so I don't know how you're doing. I'm so worried. Don't worry, aren't we all back? Lin Qingxue said coquettishly, let's go home. Lin Qingxue tugged on Yun Ruoyan's arm. Sister Ruoyan, come with us to the Lin manor. Yun Ruoyan nodded, and the group walked toward the Lin manor's carriage. Zhui Feng carried Lin Qingxue to the Lin manor's carriage, then got off and carried Zhuo Liner on his back. Brother Zhuo, are you going home? Yun Ruoyan stuck her head out of the carriage and looked at Zhui Feng. Zhui Feng's gaze swept across the crowd, pausing briefly on Yun Ruoyan. Take care, I'll see you at Kongming Academy. None of them expected Zhui Feng to leave just like that. Lin Qingchen shouted from behind, Hey, we haven't split the treasures yet. Zhui Feng had already walked far away. He turned around and waved his hand at the others. You guys keep it safe for me. Then he turned around and walked further and further away. His figure gradually disappeared on the other side of the mountain path. Lin Qingxue was a little dumbfounded. Wasn't it a little too careless to let them keep such precious herbs and beast cores? You keep it safe for them, Yun Ruoyan said. I don't think it's convenient for them to keep those valuables with them. Yun Ruoyan followed the Lin family's carriage to the Lin manor. As soon as the carriage arrived at the gates of the Lin manor, Lin Qingxue jumped out of the carriage and yelled, Grandfather, I'm home. Then, under the stares of Yun Ruoyan and Lin Qingchen, she ran into the manor. Don't be too nimble with your legs. So this girl was faking it. Yun Ruoyan and Lin Qingchen glanced at each other and shook their heads helplessly. Lin Zainan was delighted to see that all 3 of his granddaughters were safe and sound, and that they had all passed the trial. The 3 sisters also eagerly presented their treasures to Lin Zainan. Lin Qingchen took out all the things in her 100 treasures pouch one by one, and actually filled up the entire floor of the side hall. Grandfather, aren't we amazing? Lin Qingxue tugged at Lin Zainan's arm, shaking it back and forth. Amazing, amazing. How could the daughters of the Lin family, my granddaughters, not be amazing? Lin Zainan stroked his white beard, his eyes narrowing into slits as he smiled. That's right, you're amazing. Lin Qingchen couldn't help but exclaim. If not for Sister Ruoyan and us going down to save you, you'd be in hell with the wild vines. Then, Lin Qingxue stammered, if not for me, would you have been able to obtain all of these treasures? She pointed at the vials of pills that she had picked up from the nest of wild vines. If I hadn't fallen into the nest, you wouldn't have saved me, and you wouldn't have killed the wild vine spirit, and you wouldn't have obtained all of these treasures. Lin Qingxue was rendered speechless by her strange logic. Yun Ruoyan's gaze landed on a small black porcelain vial. She walked over, picked it up and handed it to Lin Zainan. Grandfather, take a look and see what this is. We don't recognize it. Lin Zainan took the vial, opened it and fanned it with his hand. He sniffed it lightly and his face immediately lit up. Grandfather, is it something good? Yun Ruoyan asked when she saw her grandfather's delighted expression. Something good, something good. Lin Zainan stood up excitedly. The poison in your body can finally be completely cured. Yun Ruoyan hesitated for a moment before a faint smile appeared on her face. As if still in disbelief, she asked, "The poison in my body can finally be completely cured?" The Lin sisters also hurried over. "Grandfather, are you saying that the poison in Sister Ruoyan's body can be completely cured?" "Yes, it can," Lin Zainan confirmed. He then turned to Lin Bo, who was standing by the side. "Lin Bo, bring me my 50-year-old wine. Also, we'll be heading to the pill-making chambers in a bit, so you stay here and don't see anyone who shows up." Lin Bo nodded, then went to the cellar to retrieve a jar of 50-year-old wine for Lin Zainan. Lin Zainan brought the three sisters to the pill-making chambers, instructing Lin Bo not to be disturbed. Lin Xianxia followed Lin Zainan's instructions, opened the jar that Lin Bo had brought, and poured a large bowl of wine into it. "Grandfather, are you going to let Sister Ruoyan drink it?" Lin Xianxia asked curiously. Lin Zainan didn't say a word, only smiling and shaking his head. Then, under everyone's gaze, he poured the contents of the jar into the wine. It was a brown, fingernail-sized object, and as it sank to the bottom of the bowl, tiny bubbles began to rise from its surface. "What's this?" Yun Ruoyan asked. Lin Zainan stared at the brown substance in the cup as if it were a treasure. "This is a phoenix jewel." "Phoenix jewel?" Lin Qingshan exclaimed in shock as if the name had excited her. "Phoenix jewel? What's a phoenix jewel?" Both Yun Ruoyan and Lin Qingshan were confused. "Sister, have you heard of bezoars and dogs?" Lin Qingshan looked at Yun Ruoyan. "Yes," Yun Ruoyan replied. "It's a treasure that grows in the bodies of cows and dogs. More accurately, it's a treasure that grows in the stomachs of cows and dogs. It can be used as medicine to detoxify poisons, and it's extremely rare." Lin Qingshan pointed at the object in the cup. "As the name suggests, a phoenix jewel grows in the stomachs of a phoenix, and it's even rarer." "It's not just rarer, it's even rarer." Lin Zainan was so excited that his beard trembled. "Phoenixes are mythological beasts, and it's even rarer to see one in 1,000 years, let alone a phoenix jewel. With a phoenix jewel as a primer and a few other antidotes, the poison in your body will definitely be cured." Lin Zainan's confident tone finally convinced Yun Ruoyan that her poison could be detoxified. Everyone's eyes lit up as they looked at the phoenix jewel that was being soaked in the wine. As the unassuming phoenix jewel soaked in the wine, its brown protective layer melted away bit by bit, revealing its golden body. After a while, a strange fragrance wafted into their noses, filling the room for a long time without dissipating. "I'm going to refine the pill now. Wait here for me." Lin Zainan picked up the bowl and walked into the inner room. As soon as Lin Zainan entered the room, Lin Qingshan spun around excitedly. "Sister Ruoyan, your poison can finally be detoxified." "Sister Ruoyan, that's great. After the poison's gone, the birthmark on your face will definitely disappear." Lin Qingshan's excitement was no less than Lin Qingshua's. "I really want to see what Sister Ruoyan will look like without the birthmark." Yun Ruoyan sat quietly in her chair, her expression calm. Even her breathing was gentle, without the slightest hint of nervousness or agitation. She had been deeply poisoned, and not only had it restricted her cultivation, it had also ruined her appearance. Although Lin Zainan had given her an antidote after discovering it, it hadn't been able to cure her completely. It was impossible for her to say that she didn't feel anything when she saw people with a purulent birthmark on her face every day. It was just that, having lived 2 lives, she was more resistant to other people's gazes. But now that she knew that she could be detoxified, how could she not be excited? It was just that she was used to hiding her emotions, and compared to the others she was much calmer. 4 hours later, there was still no movement from inside. Lin Qingshan was a little anxious and she wanted to sneak in to take a look, but Lin Qingshan pulled her back. "Grandfather needs absolute silence when he's refining pills. If you disturb him and something goes wrong, you won't be able to bear the consequences," Lin Qingshan warned Lin Qingshan sternly. Realizing the severity of the situation, Lin Qingshan stuck out her tongue and sat down obediently. Her gaze landed on Yun Ruoshua's body, but she saw that Yun Ruoshua's expression was one of indifference. She didn't understand what was going on. Lin Qingshan admired Yun Ruoyan's calm demeanor, and wondered when she'd be able to be as calm as her cousin. After another 4 hours, when the sun began to gradually set on the western mountain top, Lin Zainan finally walked out from inside. When the others saw him, they were all shocked. His originally gray hair had actually turned snow white. He was dressed in a black robe and his body was thin and his hair was snow white. When he walked out of the room with a smile on his face, he looked like an immortal. "Grandfather." The 3 sisters stood up at the same time and called out, "Grandfather." Their eyes were moist at the same time. "Grandfather." Lin Xianxia wiped away her tears and was the first to walk over. She held Lin Zainan's hand and smiled. I thought I saw an immortal just now. You're the best at flattering grandfather. Lin Zainan reached out to wipe away her tears. Lin Qingchen and Yun Ruoxia followed. Grandfather, Yun Ruoyan felt a lump in her throat and couldn't speak. Lin Zainan waved a hand. You're my granddaughter. Although you're my grandson, you're still part of the Lin family. I'm willing to do anything for you. After saying that, he stretched out his hand, and a round golden pill was quietly lying in his palm. Quick, drink it down with wine, Lin Zainan said. Chapter 49. Yun Ruoyan looked at the golden pill in her grandfather's hand and slowly extended her hand. Although she was trying her best to suppress the excitement in her heart, her fingertips still trembled imperceptibly. She gently pinched the golden pill with her two slender fingers. In an instant, ripples of spiritual power appeared on the surface of the golden pill. The ripples came one after another, floating on the surface of the pill in a peculiar fashion. Yun Ruoyan felt the pill cool to the touch, and an indescribable sense of comfort spread from her fingers to the rest of her body. Both Lin Qingchen and Lin Xianxia were stunned, but their expressions slowly changed to one of pleasant surprise. They exclaimed in unison, "This is a superior grade elixir?" The three sisters then turned to Lin Zainan. Grandfather, you've made a high-grade pill. You've finally broken through. Just like weapons, spiritual pills were categorized into low-grade, mid-grade, and high-grade. The concoction of low-grade elixirs required the cultivation of an alchemist of level 1 to level 3. Middle-grade elixirs required the cultivation of an alchemist of level 4 to level 6, and so on. High-grade elixirs required the cultivation of an alchemist of level 7 to level 9. Lin Zainan was only a 5th-rank pill master, and his cultivation had stagnated for many years. As a result, the Lin family had only been able to make mid-grade pills for so many years. Coupled with the fact that the Lin family didn't have many descendants, the Lin family was already on the brink of decline. They were merely relying on the reputation they had accumulated over the past century, as well as the reputation they had gained when Lin Zainan was young. If Lin Zainan could make a high-grade pill, then the Lin family status would be further secured. The three sisters looked at Lin Zainan excitedly. However, Lin Zainan shook his head bitterly. Breaking through isn't that easy. I'm afraid I'll never have the chance to do so in this lifetime. Then how did you refine this pill? Yun Ruoyan asked. The three sisters looked at Lin Zainan in confusion, waiting for him to answer. Lin Zainan sat on his armchair and casually took a sip of the tea that Lin Qingchen had brewed for him. I traded my cultivation for it. What? Traded his cultivation for it? The pleasant surprise of the three instantly turned into shock. One had to know that using spiritual power to refine medicine and using spiritual power to exchange medicine were two completely different concepts. The spirit force consumed by alchemy could be replenished through cultivation, but exchanging one's spirit force cultivation was a taboo for alchemists. This was because after exchanging, not only would the alchemist's cultivation regress, but they would also no longer be able to advance through cultivation. Yun Ruoyan looked at the golden pill in her hand once more, feeling as if it weighed 1,000 kilograms. Grandfather, For a moment, her chest was filled with complicated emotions and she couldn't say anything. Lin Zainan put down his teacup. His hair was snow-white, and his expression was solemn as he looked at Yun Ruo with bright eyes. You don't need to feel pressured. You're my granddaughter, my flesh and blood. Back then I couldn't protect your mother and that was the regret of my life. Now what I'm doing is a little compensation for your mother. After saying that, he turned to Lin Qingchen and ordered, pour a glass of wine for your sister and let her take the medicine quickly. Spiritual pills had to be stored in special containers after they were refined. If they were exposed to the air for long periods of time, the spiritual energy within them would dissipate. Lin Qingchen hurriedly followed her grandfather's instructions and poured a large glass of 50-year-old wine for Yun Ruoyan. Yun Ruoyan suppressed all distracting thoughts and took the glass. She popped the golden pill into her mouth, then tilted her head back and drank a large mouthful of wine. The pill melted as soon as it came into contact with the wine, and the fragrance of the pill and the wine blended together. Thick spiritual energy flowed into Yun Ruoyan's body along with the aroma of the herbs and wine. Yun Ruoyan couldn't help but close her eyes in comfort. When she opened them again, she felt as if her surroundings were clear and bright. Quick, finish the wine, Lin Zainan ordered. This phoenix bead is a miraculous antidote and it has a cool nature. Wine can help to neutralize the cold and increase its effectiveness. Quickly finish the wine. When Yun Ruoyan heard Lin Zainan's words, she immediately tilted her head back and gulped down the entire glass of wine. A spicy, warm current flowed down her body, mixing with the cool energy in her abdomen and spreading throughout her body, nourishing her organs, bones, meridians and every inch of her skin and every pore. Look, Sister Ruoyan's face. Lin Xianxia stared at Yun Ruoyan's face in shock. Her face first turned green, then red and finally a strange purple. The purple slowly receded from the left side of Yun Ruoyan's forehead to the right, finally converging on the birthmark on Yun Ruoyan's right cheek. The purplish-black poisonous blood broke through the scab that had just formed on Yun Ruoyan's right cheek and flowed down. Thank goodness, the root of the poison has finally been forced out. Lin Zainan's tone was equally excited. He turned to Lin Qingchen, who was also staring intently at Yun Ruoyan, and instructed, "Qingchen, go and collect the poisonous blood from Ruoyan's face." Lin Qingchen paused for a moment before she reacted. She quickly found a small porcelain bottle and used silver needles to collect the poisonous blood from Yun Ruoyan's face before handing it to Lin Zainan. Lin Zainan snorted coldly as he held the bottle in his hand. "I'd like to see what kind of powerful poison it was that harmed my grandson for so many years." Yun Ruoyan, on the other hand, felt as if she were floating on a cloud, her entire body relaxed and comfortable. Chirp, chirp. Amidst her incomparable comfort, Yun Ruoyan heard chirp, but she didn't want to open her eyes or pay attention to it. All she wanted to do right now was sleep. "Congratulations, mistress. You've finally purged the poison from your body." Chirp chirped happily. "Mistress, have a good sleep. You'll be better once you wake up." Yun Ruoyan stood in the middle of the room for a long time. When Lin Xianxia tried to wake her up, she found that she had fallen asleep standing up. Yun Ruoyan slept soundly, and even when Lin Xianxia and Lin Qingchen carried her onto the bed, she didn't react in the slightest. Lin Qingchen brought over some hot water, added some anti-inflammatory powder, and then used a towel to wipe away the blackish-purple blood clots on the right side of Yun Ruoyan's face. Slowly and gently, she wiped away the dirt bit by bit, revealing her fair, clean skin. As Yun Ruoyan's face gradually revealed itself, Lin Qingchen's eyes widened. After Lin Xianxia helped her grandfather back to his room to rest, she walked toward Yun Ruoyan's room. As soon as she reached the door, she heard Lin Qingchen's low voice, and she hurriedly walked in. When she saw Yun Ruoyan's face on the bed, she also gasped, and then, like Lin Qingchen, her eyes widened. Yen. In her sleep, Yun Ruoyan heard someone calling her by her nickname, a name that she had only heard when she was very young. Who was calling her? Yun Ruoyan finally opened her eyes. She was greeted by a pink peach blossom forest, and deep within the peach blossoms, that person was calling her again. Yen, come here. Who's there? Who's calling me again? Yun Ruoyan followed the voice into the peach blossom forest. Finally, she saw the woman calling her. She was dressed in a pink dress, the same color as the peach blossoms. As she danced, she smiled at Yun Ruoyan. Yen, don't you think Mother's dance is beautiful? Mother, are you my mother? Yun Ruoyan asked as she walked toward the woman. Gradually she could see her face clearly. The woman was extremely beautiful, with snow-white skin, hair as black as ink, eyebrows as deep as the sky, and eyes as bright as the stars. Yun Ruoyan was certain that this was her mother. When she was very young, Yun Ruoyan had seen her mother's portrait hanging in her father's room. Later on, Madame had taken over the house, and her mother's portrait had disappeared. However, her mother's appearance had been deeply engraved in Yun Ruoyan's mind. "Mother," Yun Ruoyan called out tearfully as she walked closer to the dancing woman. Suddenly, the woman stopped dancing and looked at Yun Ruoyan. Under Yun Ruoyan's gaze, she clutched her chest, a pained expression on her face. Then she suddenly spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. The blood stained her pink dress, and her eyes were filled with longing and reluctance as she slowly lay down amidst the falling peach blossom petals. "Mother!" Yun Ruoyan screamed as she woke up from her bed. Looking around, she found herself in a familiar room. Only then did she realize that she'd had a dream. It was a woman's bedroom, and it was very clean and tidy, as if it hadn't been empty for years. Yun Ruoyan remembered that this was her mother's bedroom in the Lin Manor. In her past life, she'd occasionally come to the Lin Manor to stay there. Behind the room was a peach blossom forest, and when the peach blossoms bloomed, it was as beautiful as a dream. Yun Ruoyan shook her head, trying to shake off the image of her dream. "Chio, mistress, you're awake, Chio," Chio chirped in her mind. Yes, that was a good sleep. Yun Ruoyan sat up from the bed, realizing that she was only wearing pajamas. Her own clothes were nowhere to be seen, likely because they were too dirty and had been thrown away. She walked to the closet by the wall and opened it, trying to find a random piece of clothing to wear. Mistress, you've slept for 3 days and 3 nights and the poison in your body has been completely purged. That's wonderful. Xiao sounded very happy. Xuanhuan picked up a pink dress from the kitchen and was putting it on when she heard Xiao's words. I slept for 3 days and 3 nights? That's right. She frowned slightly as she muttered to herself, I wonder how grandfather is, and if losing so much of his cultivation will affect his body. As for the Yun family, I haven't returned for so long. Do they think I'm dead? Ruoyan, you're awake. Lin Qingshua's voice came from behind her. Yun Ruoyan turned around to see her, but for some reason Lin Qingxua suddenly froze. Sister Qingxua, what's wrong? Yun Ruoyan looked at Lin Qingxua curiously. Lin Qingxua shivered and hurriedly patted her round cheeks, muttering to herself, Aya. Haven't I been coming to look at you every day for the past few days? How could I still be mesmerized by your beauty? What a love-struck fool. Sister Qingxua, what's wrong? Yun Ruoyan looked at Lin Qingshua's unusual behavior. She's mesmerized by your beauty? Just then Lin Qingchen walked in with a tray in her hands. She smiled at Yun Ruoyan. That little love-struck fool staring at me every day. You're practically cross-eyed. I'm not. Lin Qingxua covered her face and replied embarrassedly, I only stared at you for half a day. Yun Ruoyan didn't know what the two sisters were talking about, so she stood there silently. Lin Qingchen walked to her side, pulled her arm and said, Jiejie, let me help you dress, okay? Then without any explanation, she pulled her to the dressing table. Sister, look. Lin Qingchen pointed at the crystal mirror for Yun Ruoyan to see. Yun Ruoyan casually turned around, and a beautiful woman appeared in front of her without warning. Her skin was as white as snow, her hair loose, her eyebrows as beautiful as a painting, and her eyes as bright as the stars. Yun Ruoyan slowly raised her hand and touched her right cheek. It was as smooth and white as a newborn baby's. Is this me? She looked at herself in the mirror in disbelief. Chapter 50. Aya? That's you, Sister Ruoyan? Lin Qingxua called out from behind them. I wish it was me. Sister Qingchen even said that I'm a love-struck fool, but Sister Ruoyan's the love-struck fool. Yun Ruoyan looked at the face in the mirror that was both familiar and strange at the same time. The face of the woman in her dreams floated up in her mind. Her eyes, nose, and mouth seemed to have been carved from the same mold. Although the two of them looked alike, there were also differences. The woman's eyebrows were light and delicate, and there was an air of gentleness and beauty between them. On the other hand, Yun Ruoyan's eyebrows were thicker, and there was an air of determination between them. So this was what she looked like. When Yun Ruoyan found out that she was a beauty, for some reason she didn't feel too happy. Her heart was calm. She knew that this was what she looked like, and that she wasn't as ugly as others thought she was. On the contrary, she was a beauty. However, she also knew that an ugly face could ruin her previous life, but a beautiful face could not fulfill her life in this life. The only thing that could fulfill one's dreams was power. If you were weak, no matter how beautiful you were, you'd be nothing more than a flower in a garden that could be easily plucked off. She, on the other hand, would rather be a phoenix flower on a precipice, a flower that the world could only look up to. Lin Qingchen put Yun Ruoyan's hair into a simple bun, and she took out a pink dress from her closet that suited her figure perfectly. She looked very elegant when she wore it, and the Lin sisters were once again infatuated with her. After washing up, Yun Ruoyan ate a small bowl of porridge that Lin Qingchen had brought over. Lin Qingchen told Yun Ruoyan that Lin Zainan was waiting for her in the study, and she went to the study alone. When Lin Zainan saw Yun Ruoyan, he froze for a long time as if trying to recall something. After a long while he slowly began to speak. She's too similar, as if she and Yueme were cast from the same mold. Lin Yueme was the woman in Yun Ruoyan's dreams. When she was a year old, her mother had suddenly contracted a strange illness and passed away. That was when Yun Ruoyan's nightmares began. Grandfather, how are you feeling? Yun Ruoyan's concerned voice pulled Lin Zainan back to reality. I'm fine. He waved his hand and said carelessly, it's just that my cultivation has dropped from a 5th rank alchemist to a 3rd rank. In the future I can only refine some low-rank pills. Fortunately, I've always said that I'm in seclusion these past few years, and I almost never refine medicine for others, so I'm not afraid of being exposed. Yun Ruoyan's heart was moved, but she couldn't express it in words. She could only hold her grandfather's hand tightly. Lin Zainan patted her hand in relief. I'm even happier to see you like this than when I broke through to the 6th rank. Yueme will be happy too. Lin Zainan's expression became sad. He continued, Yume's life is bitter and unlucky. Child, you have to work hard. Grandfather will help you. Grandfather, I was only 1 year old when my mother died. I don't have any memories of her. Xuanhuan's heart skipped a beat. But when I was a little older and had some memories, I only remembered servants pointing at me behind my back, saying that I was a jinx, and that I was the cause of my mother's death. Nonsense. Lin Zainan slammed the table angrily. Everyone in the Yun family loves to spout nonsense. Ruoyan, don't take it to heart. Yun Ruoyan nodded, indicating that she didn't mind. Seeing that Lin Zainan was no longer agitated, she continued, but those servants weren't wrong about one thing. There was something fishy about my mother's death. She looked at Lin Zainan with a frown. Grandfather, how did my mother die? Was it really as people say that she suddenly contracted a strange illness? Lin Zainan stared at her for a long time before finally replying, I didn't want to tell you because you were still too young, but you found out for yourself. Yun Ruoyan's heart skipped a beat. It seemed that she had guessed correctly. Her mother, that beautiful woman, had indeed been killed by someone. Lin Zainan told Yun Ruoyan that when she was just a year old, Lin Yueme had brought her to stay with the Lin family. That year the peach blossoms were in full bloom, and Lin Yueme often brought her out to play in the peach blossom forest. One day while the two of them were playing, Lin Yueme suddenly began vomiting blood. Her health deteriorated day by day, and within a month she had passed away. At the time, Lin Zainan had been attending an alchemy competition in the Yu Kingdom. By the time he returned, Lin Yueme had long since been buried, and he had been brooding over this matter ever since. Although I had my suspicions at the time, Yueme's illness had occurred in the Lin manor, and I had no reason to question her. Moreover, at the time your first and second uncles had suddenly left home, and your first aunt had gone out to look for them, but she still hasn't returned. Your second aunt passed away in an accident, and your grandmother, worried about her children, fell seriously ill and passed away not long after. In those few years the Lin family was in constant turmoil, and this matter has been on my mind ever since. Yun Ruoyan's first uncle Lin Tianming and second uncle Lin Tianhai were the fathers of Lin Qingqian and Lin Qingxua. Both of them had suddenly left home when the Lin sisters were very young, and their mothers had also left them. As a result, the Lin sisters were just as pitiful as Yun Ruoyan. Lin Zainan continued, 2 months ago, you came to tell me that you'd been poisoned. Only when I tried to detoxify you did I discover that the poison in your body was quite peculiar. Peculiar? How so? Yun Ruoyan clasped her hands tightly together and leaned forward. She looked at Lin Zainan, afraid that she would miss a single word. The poison in your body wasn't directly inflicted on you. Lin Zainan's snow-white brows were tightly knitted together as he looked at Yun Ruoyan. The poison in your body came from the womb. Womb poison? Grandfather, what do you mean? What I mean is that your mother was poisoned when she was pregnant with you, but the poison wouldn't immediately kill her. Instead, it would silently conceal itself within her body, and in the process, it would enter your body while you were still in her womb. After hearing this, Yun Ruoyan felt her hands tremble, her legs tremble, and her entire body tremble. Oh, who would be so malicious as to harm her mother in such a manner? Even as she was still in her womb, they wouldn't let her off. Grandfather. Yun Ruoyan suppressed the anger in her heart as she looked at Lin Zainan. Do you know who poisoned her? Your mother has always been a gentle and kind child, and I really can't think of anyone who would use such a vicious method to harm her. Lin Zainan sighed, seeming to have aged a great deal in an instant, and even his straight back seemed a little bent. I'd originally intended to investigate on my own, but now that you've found out as well, we'll find the culprit together. Yun Ruoyan abruptly stood up from her chair, seemingly talking to Lin Zainan, but also to herself. I swear that I'll find this culprit, and I'll make him pay back to me and my mother 10-fold, 100-fold. Lin Zainan looked at his grandson and nodded slowly. Just as the two of them were talking, there was a knock on the door. Grandfather, the Yuns are here again to urge Miss Ruoyan to return to the Yun household. Lin Bo's voice came from outside. Tell them that Ruoyan's injuries haven't healed yet and send them back, Lin Zainan said impatiently. But, Lin Bo replied awkwardly. The Yun said that if Miss Ruoyan doesn't return today, she'll never be able to return. Lin Zainan slammed his fist on the table. That Yun Lan. After Yueme's death he no longer cares about me. Tell the Yuns that we're keeping Ruoyan here. Yes, old master. Uncle Lin replied immediately. Lin Bo, wait. Yun Ruoyan hurried to the door of the study and told Lin Bo, tell them to go back first. Tell them that I'll be back soon. After Lin Bo left, Yun Ruoyan went back to placate the angry Lin Zainan. Grandfather, don't be angry. It wasn't worth it. What a bully. Lin Zainan suppressed the anger in his heart. He was a man of high self-control, and he didn't care about ordinary gains and losses. But whenever he thought of Yunlan, Lin Zainin couldn't help but feel his chest tighten. Royan, let me tell you, your mother's good in every way, but her eyes aren't bright enough for her to find a heartless man, Lin Zainin lamented. Lin Zainin said bitterly, I strongly opposed it at that time, but your mother was determined to marry him. I really regret not locking your mother up. He turned to Yun Ruoyan and said earnestly, Child, you'll have to keep your eyes open in the future. Don't be fooled by a man's looks and words. Grandfather, don't worry, I won't. Yun Ruoyan gently massaged Lin Zainin's shoulders. Lin Zainin continued, but it's all good now. With your looks, most men won't be able to match up to you. His tone was proud and gratified. Yun Ruoyan stopped what she was doing and walked up to Lin Zainin, squatting by his feet and looking at him. Grandfather, my mother was so beautiful, but she still couldn't escape someone else's schemes. It's clear that a woman's beauty isn't a weapon to protect herself. Sometimes, it can even attract malicious schemes. Yun Ruoyan's eyes were misty, but at the same time, they were filled with determination. I don't want to appear in public with such an eye-catching appearance before I'm able to protect myself. Grandfather, can you help me? Lin Zainin looked at his granddaughter. Although her facial features resembled his daughter's, the energy that emanated from her bones was completely different from his daughter's. In fact, she bore a resemblance to him when he was younger. No, she was even more outstanding than he was. Lin Zainin finally smiled in satisfaction. At Yun Ruoyan's request, Lin Zainin used medicine to help her revert back to her original ugly appearance. He handed Yun Ruoyan a few small porcelain bottles of different colors, telling her which ones would cause skin irritation and which ones would reduce swelling. Mixed together, they would emit a foul odor, and when applied to the face, they would be no different from rotten meat, but they wouldn't harm the skin in the slightest. When Yun Ruoyan once again appeared in front of the Lin sisters, they were once more shocked but even more regretful. They had not seen enough of that peerless beauty in the heavens and earth. As it neared noon, Yun Ruoyan didn't stay at the Lin Manor for lunch. Instead, she had Uncle Lin send her back to the Yun Manor. Perhaps because of the golden pill, Yun Ruoyan didn't feel hungry at all, even though she had only eaten a small bowl of porridge for 3 days and 3 nights. As soon as Yun Ruoyan stepped out of her carriage, a servant ran in to report her arrival. Before Yun Ruoyan could even return to her rooms, she was invited to the Yun Manor's main hall. Over there, almost all of the Yun family's heads were waiting for her like a tiger watching its prey. Chapter 51. As soon as Yun Ruoyan walked into the great hall, she saw her grandmother seated at the head of the table as well as her father Yun Lan. Her second aunt, Madame Tang, sat to her father's right, and her 3 best friends sat on either side of her. In her previous life, Yun Ruoyan had often seen this kind of attitude, but every time she would still be so nervous that she didn't know what to do. No matter what others said, she would always act like a yes man. As for her past self, she couldn't help but feel a complex mix of anger and sorrow at her misfortune. She was the grandson of the Lin family and the daughter of the Yun family. She originally had a beautiful mother and could have been pampered for a lifetime, who had taken everything away from her. Yun Ruoyan's gaze swept across every single one of her so-called family members. Ruoyan greets grandmother, father, and mother. Yun Ruoyan walked to the center of the hall and bowed toward the main seat. Both Yun Lan and Madame and were a little surprised to see Yun Ruoyan. Yun Ruoyan was wearing a pink dress and her hair was combed into a simple bun. Her head was slightly lowered as she approached them. His appearance was very much like a person that they did not dare to mention, a person that they wanted to forget yet was deeply engraved in their minds. Lin Yueme, that's right, she's Lin Yueme's daughter. I've always called her an ugly freak and forgot that she has a beautiful mother. Madame snickered inwardly. Of these two, one is a beautiful woman while the other is a freak. What a pair of wretched lives. As soon as Yun Ruoyan raised her head to reveal her scarred face, Yun Lan snapped out of his daze. His gaze turned cold, and his ice-cold face did not reveal the slightest fluctuation of emotions in his heart. On the other hand, Yi Qianying Yun Ruoyao and Yun Ruoyu were both shocked that Yun Ruoyan hadn't died, but they also had a guilty conscience and gloated. For a moment, his emotions were complicated and indescribable. Ruoyan, have your injuries healed? The old matriarch broke the silence, her yellow eyes glancing at Yun Ruoyan before landing on the agate ring on her finger. Yun Ruoyan bowed to her grandmother once more. I'm almost there. Thank you for your concern, grandmother. Since you're almost fully recovered, let's talk about the situation in the secret realm. I heard from your sisters that you got separated. Our whole family was worried about you for a long time. I didn't expect you to go to the Lin family. Madame Min glanced at Xuanhuan. If someone hadn't seen you enter the Lin's manor and informed us, would you still have been planning on returning? Mother. When I came out of the imperial territory, I suffered a minor injury, but I'm afraid I'll have to deal with it. The family's carriage came back first, so I followed my cousins to my maternal grandparents' house. I wanted to come back immediately, but grandfather felt sorry for me and asked me to stay for 2 days. She continued with some self-blame. Ruoyan has made everyone worried. I apologize to everyone here. Madame Min hadn't seen Xuanhuan for nearly half a month, and she had long since forgotten how eloquent Xuanhuan was. All she remembered was that Xuanhuan had always been a pushover, but she hadn't expected Xuanhuan to be so well-spoken. Madame Min took a sip of tea and forced her expression to calm down. I heard that you obtained a treasure that you were supposed to hand over to the family. Have you forgotten? Xuanhuan raised her head and looked at Madame Min with her bright eyes. Mother, who told you that I obtained a treasure? Madame Min was just about to speak when Yunlan snorted and turned to her. There's no need for parents to beat around the bush. Then he turned to Xuanhuan with a pair of dark eyes. Let me ask you, did you abandon your 3 sisters in the imperial territory and escape by yourself? Hearing this, Xuanhuan laughed coldly. Her gaze swept coldly across Yunruoyao's group of 3, thinking that the guilty party was the first to complain, and a vicious dog was the first to bite. No, she replied firmly. She said resolutely, abandoning my sisters and running for my life is a cowardly act. Of course I won't do it. Yunruoyao and her sisters paled at being called beasts. Are you saying that we've wronged you? Yunruoyao was the first to stand up. Isn't that the case? Touch your conscience and tell me who was the one who abandoned who. Yunruoyu was already feeling a little guilty after being rebuked by Yunruoyan, and now she couldn't say a single word, her face red. Sister Ruoyan, how can you distort the truth? Yiqining replied meekly. If not for young Master Pei's timely arrival, we would have died under the saber-toothed tiger's sharp teeth. After saying that, she still had a lingering fear in her heart as she stroked her chest. Oh, young Master Pei, why are you addressing me so politely? In the imperial territory, weren't you always calling me Brother Ao? Yunruoyan's face was full of disdain. I thought the 2 of you had already pledged yourselves to each other. Don't spout nonsense. Yichening's face flushed red and white. Sister Ruoyan, Yunruoyao spoke up. Yunruoyao continued. She was only 2 months older than Yunruoyan, but she acted as if she were the older sister. In the imperial territory you refused to travel with us, and then when we ran into the saber-toothed tiger, not only did you refuse to help, but you even took your 2 sisters and ran away. Not only was her tone furious, but she was also full of self-righteousness. Her acting skills were many times better than those of her 2 sisters. We didn't want to pursue this matter, but you're so unrepentant. As she spoke, she turned to Yunlan. Father, you must punish Ruoyan severely, or our Lin family's reputation will be ruined by her. Yes. Madame Min, who had been scolded by her father for a while, continued, the Lins have always been strict, but we're also strict. If you admit your mistake and hand over the treasure you obtained from the imperial territory, we'll be lenient. Yunruoyan frowned, a mocking smile on her face. Mother, you keep asking me to hand over the treasure. What treasure is it? The saber-toothed tiger's beast core, Madame Min replied angrily. You're still refusing to admit it? You didn't give it to the Lins, did you? Yunruoyao and the others hadn't seen Yunruoyan kill the saber-toothed tiger, but they had seen the tiger's teeth on Zhui Yifeng's body. As a result, they deduced that Yunruoyan had killed the tiger and taken its beast core. On the other hand, Yunruoyan hadn't returned directly to the Yun household after leaving the imperial territory, but rather to the Lins. As a result, no matter who had obtained the beast core, as long as Yunruoyan didn't hand it over, the blame would be placed on her. Not handing over such a precious treasure to the Lins would be considered a traitor, and in serious cases, one would be expelled from the family. If they couldn't kill you, they'd chase you far, far away. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. You must have given the beast core to the Lins. As soon as we entered the imperial territory, you refused to travel with us, instead treating the Lins like sisters. Yun Ruoyu retorted angrily. Sister Ruoyu, you must have forgotten that your surname is Yun, and you're already thinking of yourself as a member of the Lins. Yun Ruoyan's expression changed and she looked sharply at Yun Ruoyu. Sister Ruoyu, do you have any proof for what you're saying, or it'll be slander? Yun Ruoyu couldn't help but feel a little breathless under her gaze, but she stubbornly insisted, if you don't admit it, then hand over the beast core. She seemed certain that Xuanhuan wouldn't be able to hand over the saber-toothed tiger's beast core. As expected, Xuanhuan replied, "I can't right now." Yunruoyu turned to Yunlan and Madam and Father Mother, "What do you think? We're not slandering her, are we?" Ruoyan. Madam Anne's face darkened, but her lips curled into a mocking smile. "You're eating the Yun family's food and living in their house, but you're giving away the treasure you've obtained to someone else. Such a traitorous act, it's really the same as your mother." "Enough." Yunlan stood up from his seat, stopping Madam Anne in time. However, his cold gaze remained fixed on his daughter, Yunruoyan. "Yunner." He walked up to Yunruoyan and called her by her nickname. Yunruoyan couldn't remember when this father of hers had once called her by her pet name, as if he were a doting father. "Do you still remember the rules of the Yun family?" His tone, however, didn't contain the slightest bit of affection for his children. Instead, it was icy cold. "Yes." Yunruoyan lowered her head, refusing to meet his gaze. "Recite it. 1. You can't abandon your siblings. 2. You must always put the family's interests before anything else. 3. That's enough." Yunlan interrupted Yunruoyan, his voice even harsher than before. "If you violate the family's rules, you'll be punished. I'm expelling you from the Yun family now. Do you accept that?" Yunruoyan raised her head and stared back at Yunlan coldly. Word by word she spat out, "I Yunlan. No, I accept." Meeting Yunruoyan's cold gaze and uncompromising tone, Yunlan didn't get angry. Instead, he raised his thick black eyebrows and asked, "Oh? What?" Yunruoyan stood up straight, exuding a stubbornness that she had never felt before. 1. I didn't abandon my siblings. The truth can't be judged just based on how many mouths you have. Yunruoyan had been looking at her father's eyes the entire time. His brow ridge was very high, and the two thick ink-black eyebrows above cast a dark shadow beneath his eyes, making his already pitch-black eyes seem like a deep well, emitting a cold aura. But Yunruoyan wasn't afraid. She stared back at him, unflinching. 2. I did obtain the saber-toothed tiger's beast core, but why would I give it to the Lin family? Yunruoyan looked at Yunlan in astonishment. "The only reason I'm close to my grandfather's family is because of my mother. I'm close to my 2 cousins because they've lost their parents' love since they were young. We're in the same boat, and as their older sister, I want to take care of them. But I've never forgotten that my surname is Yun." Yunlan raised an eyebrow. Lost their parents' love? They were in the same boat. Was she complaining to him? But Yunruoyan's expression didn't contain the slightest hint of complaint. Then didn't you say that you couldn't produce the saber-toothed tiger's beast core?" Yunruoyu persisted. Chapter 52. Sister. Yunruoyan turned to Yunruoyu once more. "When I said that I couldn't take it out right now, I didn't mean that I secretly gave it to the Lins. Rather, I gave the saber-toothed tiger's core to Steward Wu when I entered the manor, and it's probably in the storehouse by now. If you don't believe me, you can ask Steward Wu about it." Yunruoyan's words were truly unexpected. Yunruoyao and the others had only obtained a few low-grade beast cores, and as soon as they entered the Yun manor, they couldn't wait to show off to Yunlan. Yunruoyan, on the other hand, had given a mid-grade beast core to Steward Wu for storage? Who would believe this if he told them? Xiaolan. Yunruoyu's grandmother, who had been sitting at the head of the table with Yunlan the entire time, finally opened her eyes. "Call Steward Wu over and have him bring the saber-toothed tiger's core. I haven't seen a treasure in a long time, so let me broaden my horizons today." "Yes, madam." Xiaolan nodded and walked out. A short while later, Steward Wu returned with a black velvet box, which he handed to his grandmother. The old grandmother took the box and opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a golden bead the size of a baby's fist. The light emitted by the bead illuminated the old grandmother's wrinkled smiling face. "Good stuff, this really is good stuff." The old grandmother smiled and handed the box in her hand to Yunlan. Yunlan took it and looked at it. A satisfied smile finally appeared on his cold face. Child, you've worked hard." Her grandmother extended a wizened hand to Yunruoyan. Yunruoyan hurriedly stepped forward to hold her grandmother's hand. "Ruoyan, it's no trouble at all. It's my duty to contribute to the Yun family." As she spoke, she raised her hand to wipe the corners of her eyes, and her voice sounded a little choked. "Good boy, what a good boy." The Yun matriarch patted Yunruoyan's hand with a heartache. "It's good that you think that way. After all, you're the sole wife-born daughter of the Yun family, and it's only right that you bear more of the family's responsibilities." Madam and Yunruoyao and the others' hearts sank. For so long Yun Ruoyan's position as the sole wife-born daughter of the Yun family had been completely suppressed by them. Madame In had been looking for an opportunity to remove Yun Ruoyan's status as the sole wife-born daughter of the Yun family, so that her daughter Yun Ruoyao could take her place. However, Yun Ruoyan's words confirmed Yun Ruoyan's status as the eldest daughter of the Yun family. Was the plan she had been working on for so long going to fail just like that? Madame In couldn't help wringing her handkerchief tightly. But Sister Ruoyan didn't care about our lives for the treasure. Are we just going to let this go? Yun Ruoyan immediately interjected. Sister Ruoyu, I really don't understand what you're saying. She stood up from her grandmother's side and walked in front of the Yun sisters. On one hand, you said that you were attacked by the saber-toothed tiger, and on the other that I escaped with Qingchen and Qingxua. On the other hand, you kept demanding that I hand over the tiger's core. Don't you think that's a slap in the face? Yun Ruoyu paused, unsure of how to respond. She couldn't help but look toward Yun Ruoyao, who was sitting upright and silent. When Steward Wu brought over the tiger's core, Yun Ruoyao knew that they had lost again. Yun Ruoyu glared at Yun Ruoyan hatefully. She couldn't help but think back to last year's birthday, when they had gone up together to give their grandmother a gift. When she was standing next to Yun Ruoyan, she had purposely stepped on the corner of Yun Ruoyan's dress, causing her to fall to the ground. The jade scepter that she had been preparing for her grandmother's birthday had also broken into two. But when Yun Ruoyu had pretended to apologize to Yun Ruoyan, she had said that it wasn't her sister's fault, and that it was all her own clumsiness. From then on, Yun Ruoyu had decided that Yun Ruoyan was a pushover. Yun Ruoyan's image as a pushover was too deeply ingrained in everyone's hearts, and Yun Ruoyao and the others had been too eager to frame her. As a result, they hadn't thought that there was anything wrong with their reasoning. But Yun Ruoyan was no longer the Yun Ruoyan of the past. With a few words, not only had she resolved her own crisis, she had even pointed the finger at them. Yun Ruoyu gritted her teeth. The Yun Ruoyan of the past was still cuter. No matter how hard she thought about it, she couldn't figure out what had happened. How had Yun Ruoyan suddenly become so evil? What's the matter? Speechless? Yun Ruoyan looked at Yun Ruoyan, her eyes an expression full of mockery. Yun Ruoyu's face was bright red as she stammered, Well, the situation at the time was complicated. All right. Her grandmother waved her hand, clearly impatient. We're sisters, so let's tolerate each other a little. I'm tired, so let's all go. She turned to Yun Ruoyan and smiled. Ruoyan, go back to your quarters and get some rest. She then turned to Xiaolan. From today onwards, have my kitchens prepare some tonics and send them to your quarters every day. Ruoyan's too skinny and she needs to take care of herself. Yun Ruoyan saw that her grandmother was trying to keep the peace. Although she was unwilling, she knew that now wasn't the time to make things difficult for them. Thank you, grandmother. Xiaolan helped her grandmother back to her quarters to rest, and Madame In left the meeting hall with Yun Ruoyao and the others. Just as Yun Ruoyan was about to leave, Yun Lan suddenly called out to her. Yun Ruoyan stood there quietly, her head slightly lowered, waiting for Yun Lan to speak. Yun Lan looked at Yun Ruoyan in front of him, a little surprised. This unassuming daughter of his seemed to have grown up all of a sudden. In the past, Yun Ruoyan had always been like a little shrimp, hiding in a corner, never daring to raise her head in front of him. Even when she would occasionally call out to him, it would be in a small voice as if he would eat her up. But the Yun Ruoyan in front of him now looked like a grown girl. She was wearing a pink dress that he had never seen her wear before, and when her head was lowered, she really did look like her mother. Father? Yun Ruoyan raised her head to look at Yun Lan in confusion. Yun Lan only came back to his senses when he met her bright eyes, but he asked a question that left Yun Ruoyan scratching her head. How old are you this year? How old are you? Yun Ruoyan was a little surprised by this question, and her heart ached a little. He was her father and he had given birth to her, but he didn't know how old she was. Yun Ruoyan laughed coldly in her heart, but she maintained a respectful expression. Father, I'm 13 this year and I'll be 14 in 2 months' time. Oh, Yun Lan murmured as if to himself. You're almost 15. On the Xuanhuan continent, when a girl reached 15 she could be married off at the age of 15. Yun Ruoyan was still a little surprised. Why would he suddenly ask about her age? That's all. You may leave. Yun Lan waved his hand. Yun Ruoyan nodded and turned to leave. Yun Lan looked at Yun Ruoyan's back and suddenly sighed. He couldn't help but feel that it was a pity that a birthmark had ruined his daughter's beauty. If not for this birthmark, given Lin Yueme's beauty, even if her daughter only inherited 1/10 of her beauty, she wouldn't be too bad. In that case, given her status as the sole wife-born daughter of the Yun family, it wouldn't be impossible for her to marry into the palace. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly thought of something. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. When Xuanhuan returned to her rooms, Peony and Xilan were naturally overjoyed to see her. They hurriedly reported to her what had happened in her rooms while she had been gone. Xilan reported that ever since Xuanhuan had obtained the right to enter the imperial territory, the servants outside had become much more courteous to those in her rooms. However, there were still a few who were secretly waiting for Xuanhuan to fail the trial. The two maids looked expectantly at Xuanhuan. Ever since Yunruoyao and the others had returned, the two maids had been like ants on a hot tin roof. Every day they would go out and ask about their mistress's condition. Finally, Yunruoyan's return had come. Yunruoyan wanted to keep them in suspense. After a long while, she finally announced that she had passed the trial and was now waiting for her acceptance letter to enter Kongming Academy. Another round of cheers erupted from Ting Lan Yuan's courtyard. Peony said that ever since Yunruoyan had cleaned up the household, her rooms had become much quieter. Hearing Peony's words, Yunruoyan couldn't help but think of Madame Anne's maid Ling Lan, and asked about her condition. Peony said that Ling Lan was rather well behaved. Because Yunruoyan wasn't present, Madame Anne hadn't ordered her to do anything. As Yunruoyan nibbled on the fresh green bean cake on the table, she thought about how she'd made Madame Anne suffer once more today, and she was sure to make her move soon. Ling Lan would soon be of use to her, and Peony would have to keep a close eye on her. Chio. Just as Yunruoyan was thinking about this, Chio's voice rang out in her mind. Mistress, you've just gotten rid of the poison in your body, so these next few days are a good time to cultivate. Don't delay your cultivation. Chio's reminder caused Yunruoyan to immediately set aside her complicated thoughts. She told herself that while she searched for the culprit behind her and her mother's deaths, she couldn't delay her cultivation. Even if she found the culprit, she had to have the ability to exact revenge. Then, she had Xilan prepare some hot water for her to wash away her exhaustion before beginning to cultivate. As for Do Yu, who Yunruoyan and Lin Qingchen both loathed, after Yunruoyan had shaved off the hair bun that he had kept for 17 years, he had been running around with his hair disheveled and lost his way in his haste. When night fell, he found a random patch of grass and lay down, lamenting his bad luck. When the scene of Yunruoyan and Lin Qingchen bathing appeared in his mind again, he couldn't help but shiver. He had thought that he had met with luck, but he hadn't expected to meet two female water ghosts who had used some kind of sorcery to shave him bald. How would his brothers laugh at him if they saw him? Just as he was in a daze, he suddenly heard a faint cry for help. Help, help. The voice was very soft and intermittent. Do Yu woke up from his dream with a start. Who is it? He sat up from the grass and asked in a small voice. Help, brother, help me. Hearing that there was a response, the voice immediately grew louder. Do Yu walked in the direction of the voice, trembling with fear. Moonlight shone through the gaps in the trees, and he saw the slender figure of a woman lying on the ground. In the past, if he had seen a woman lying on the ground crying for help, he would have pounced on her without hesitation. But because of his experience during the day, he was a little afraid. Damn, are you a human or a ghost? I can't be so unlucky as to meet water ghosts in the day and evil ghosts at night, can I? Do Yu carefully approached the woman, but he didn't dare to get too close, maintaining a certain distance. Brother, I'm not a ghost. I'm also a descendant of the family who came here to participate in the trial. I was harmed by a scoundrel and was seriously injured. Brother, please save me. As the woman spoke, she slowly raised her head. With the help of the moonlight, Do Yu saw a woman's face, stained with blood but still beautiful. This beautiful woman was none other than the Yu maiden whose heart had been pierced by Pei Zio's dagger, Jin Fei. Chapter 53. Pei Zio's dagger had been quite accurate, and Jin Fei would have died without a doubt. However, Jin Fei had a high-grade life-saving pill in her possession. When Wang Kuang's spiritual vortex had been destroyed by Yunruoyan's spiritual energy, Jin Fei had been very conflicted as to whether or not she should use this pill to save him. Just as she was hesitating, Wang Kuang had died. Jin Fei was incredibly thankful that she had hesitated, or she wouldn't have been able to survive until now. Brother, save me. I'm the eldest daughter of the Jin family of the Yu Kingdom. If you save me, the Jin family will definitely reward you. Although Jin Fei had managed to survive, that stab had pierced her heart. Even if she hadn't died, she would have been half dead. After confirming that this half-dead woman wouldn't be a threat to him, Do Yao squatted down by Jin Fei's side and looked at her with great interest. Eldest daughter of the Jin family, the one that has businesses all over the four kingdoms? Yes, ahem, that Jin family. Jin Fei looked at Do Yao as if he were a life-saving straw. The Jin family is very rich. If you save me, I'll give you anything you want. Whatever he wanted, he could be satisfied. These words struck a chord in Do Yu's heart. The Do family was considered a mid-tier family in the Li Kingdom, and Do Yao's position in the family was also mid-tier. He was the eldest son of Gui, the head of the Do family, and had originally been very favored. Gui had spent a great deal of effort to groom him. But this kid was a disappointment, spending all his time either walking his dog or visiting brothels, and the Do family had spent so much effort on him. By the time he was 16, his cultivation had been stuck at the top 3 ranks of a blade master. Just a few days before entering the imperial territory, he had finally broken through to become a 4th-rank blade master. Gui had a love-hate relationship with him, and in the end he had given him a recommendation to follow his brothers into the trial. His brothers didn't like this mischievous little brother either, but their father had ordered them to keep him by their side, and they often pointed fingers at him. Do Yao, who was used to being wild, couldn't stand this kind of discipline, so he sneaked away when his brothers weren't paying attention. Unexpectedly, he was lucky enough to slip away like this. Do Yu's shifty gaze swept over Jin Fei, who was lying on the ground. Jin Fei's red robes had been torn in several places due to the long hours she had spent crawling on the ground, revealing her snow-white skin. The skin looked especially translucent under the moonlight, making Do Yu's heart itch. A 16-year-old boy was considered an adult on the Xuanhuan continent. Do Yu had tasted a few brothels, but none of them could compare to the first daughter of the Jin family. This woman looked a little smaller than him, but her waist was slender and her buttocks were plump. Her development was quite on point. Because Jin Fei was lying on her stomach, he couldn't see her chest. However, from the rest of her body, he could tell that it wasn't small. Do Yao couldn't help but wipe the drool from the corner of his mouth. Jin Fei was a smart person, and quickly noticed the dirty thoughts in Do Yu's eyes. But this strange, disheveled, monkey-like man was her only hope. She could only grit her teeth and swallow her blood. "Brother, my injuries are very serious and I'm barely alive. If you're not willing to save me, I'm afraid I won't live to see tomorrow morning." Her voice was full of misery and despair. Do Yu, who had always been protective of the fairer sex, immediately felt a surge of manliness. "Sister, don't worry. With me here, I won't let anything happen to you." As he spoke, Do Yao picked Jin Fei up and pinched her supple buttocks to soothe his aching heart. Do Yu helped Jin Fei up and tended to her wounds. He found that her injuries were indeed quite serious. There was a 3-inch gash on her chest, and it was still bleeding profusely. Do Yu tended to Jin Fei's wound with the intention of taking advantage of her and saving her life. "Sister, you're really lucky to not die like that. You're bound to have good fortune in the future," Do Yu said as he sprinkled some medicinal powder on Jin Fei's wound. Jin Fei closed her eyes and raised her head, enduring the pain as well as the perverted gaze of the annoying fellow in front of her. In her heart, she had already cut Pei Zio, Yun Ruoyan, and the others into pieces. "Yun Ruoyan, Pei Zio, the Yun Pei and Lin families, just you wait. When I, Jin Fei, get out of here, I'll tear you to shreds." Yun Ruoyan cultivated in her pocket dimension for a day and a night before finally opening her eyes. Because she had instructed them not to disturb her for the next 2 days, no one would disturb her. Chirp. Yun Ruoyan's cheerful chirps echoed in her mind, and she couldn't suppress the joy in her heart. She clenched her fists tightly to calm herself down. "Congratulations, mistress. You've broken through 3 levels in a row. You're now an early-stage 7th-rank blade master." After dispelling the poison that had been restricting her cultivation, Yun Ruoyan felt that her cultivation had become incomparably smooth. In the past, when she had been cultivating the basic technique of absorbing spiritual energy from the heavens and earth, it had felt as if her body had been blocked by something. More often than not, she would only be able to absorb a small amount of spiritual energy after half a day's cultivation, and this little bit of spiritual energy would quickly disappear without a trace. But now that she was cultivating, it was as if all the pores on her body had opened up, and as long as she exerted the slightest bit of force, spiritual energy would gush into her body. At first, because she had absorbed too much spiritual energy, Yun Ruoyan felt a little uncomfortable. She had been worried that the large amount of spiritual energy would cause her body to explode, so she had wanted to stop cultivating. But Chirp had stopped her. It had told her that her current situation was akin to a dry patch of land suddenly receiving rain, and that she wouldn't drown to death. Then it had imparted to her a technique for condensing spiritual energy, known as the key gathering technique. This key gathering technique allowed one to condense spiritual energy from the heavens and earth into one's own spiritual vortex, then gather it in one's dantian. With this high-grade cultivation technique and Xiaoqiu's guidance, Xuanhuan managed to jump 3 ranks in one day and one night. She was already a 7th-rank blade master. Even she couldn't believe it. She stretched out a hand and circulated the spiritual energy in her dantian. The spiritual energy flowed through her meridians and into her fingers. As long as she infused this spiritual energy into her weapons, she would be able to unleash a powerful attack. Xuanhuan curled her fingers up one by one, slowly clenching them into a fist. Chirp, if I were to activate the bracelet's power right now, wouldn't I be able to surpass 9th rank? According to Xiaoqiu, the bracelet's pocket dimension could double the user's spiritual energy. If that was the case, then if Xuanhuan's current 7th rank cultivation were to double, she'd definitely be able to surpass a 9th rank blade master's. Logically speaking, yes, Chirp replied. Xiaoqiu replied, but given your current spiritual vortex and physical endurance, you can only wield the strength of a peak 7th rank blade master at most. If you forcibly use the bracelet's power to increase your cultivation, you'll be in danger of exploding. Xuanhuan's heart, which had been fluttering in the wind despite her best efforts to suppress it, suddenly dropped. It seemed that becoming a truly strong cultivator in a day wasn't going to be so easy. Alright, I understand. Having experienced so many ups and downs, Xuanhuan was able to quickly calm down. Moreover, as a 7th rank blade master, she was practically invincible among the younger generation of the Yun family. Chirp. Mistress, there's someone behind your room. Chirp suddenly warned. Just as Chirp finished speaking, Xuanhuan saw the back window open a crack. Who is it? She shouted, wanting to get off the bed to stop the intruder, but it was too late. That person's movements were incredibly fast, and in a blur he was already standing right in front of Xuanhuan's room. Xuanhuan's movements were equally fast. As soon as she saw the intruder's face, she turned around and pulled down the curtains on her bed. Why are you so shy today? Are you afraid to show your face? Xuanhuan's black robe seemed to blend in with the darkness of the night, but his complexion was so fair that Xuanhuan was able to see his face clearly. He did not stand on ceremony. After he finished speaking, he sat on the stool and poured himself a cup of tea. With a golden fan in one hand and a teacup in the other, he sat cross-legged, looking at Xuanhuan behind the curtains. Why are you here again? Xuanhuan called out bluntly. Didn't I tell you that we'd never meet again? Why are you here? Xuanhuan's tone was unfriendly, but Xuanhuan wasn't angry. As he sipped the tea that had long since cooled down, he tapped the edge of the table with his gold-plated folding fan and said in a tongue twister, I asked you first. You answer me why you're afraid to meet people, and then I'll answer you why I'm here again. Xuanhuan was rendered speechless by his childish tone. She could only reply, the birthmark on my face is broken, and the wound hasn't healed yet. Red and white pus and blood keep oozing out. I'm afraid I'll scare you. Xuanhuan deliberately made her face look disgusting. If she couldn't chase him away, she'd disgust him to death. Xuanhuan wrinkled his pretty nose, disgusted by her words. Alright then. I was here to see how you're doing on behalf of someone else, but now that you've said it, I don't even have the slightest intention of seeing you. Xuanhuan couldn't help but snicker at the childish boy she'd managed to trick. Her tone of voice had a tinge of cheerfulness to it. Other than my face, I'm fine. Tell that person not to worry about me and you can leave now. You're fine even though your face is like that. Xuanhuan's nose wrinkled even more. You're a strange woman, but the person who's worried about you is also a strange person. You two are a match made in heaven. Seeing that Xuanhuan had taken the initiative to mention that person, Xuanhuan was no longer in a hurry to chase him away. Instead, she asked, what's so strange about that person? Chapter 54. Well, that's a long story. Xuanhuan's interest was piqued. He placed the teacup in his hand on the table and prepared to start his rant. But as soon as he opened his mouth, he immediately pointed his fan in Xuanhuan's direction and smiled. You're trying to get information out of me, aren't you? Although I really want to tell you, I've already promised that person not to reveal anything about him to you, or else I won't be able to drink his prized 150-year-old brew. Then you'd better leave. Xuanhuan continued to chase him away. I'm going to rest. Also, please tell that person that the poison in my body is so peculiar that even my grandfather couldn't do anything about it. Although I saved him once and he promised to help me, I'm not one to force him to do something he doesn't want to do. Just tell him to forget about it and pretend he never saw me. Are you stupid? Xuanhuan hurriedly interrupted Yunruoyan. Do you know how much that promise is worth? Are you going to abandon it just like that? Umph. Yunruoyan snorted. I don't care how much a promise from someone who doesn't even want to reveal his identity is worth. This was Yunruoyan's heartfelt words. Her tragic experiences in her past life had taught her that all superficial seduction was fake, and only genuine exchange with genuine sincerity was real. Xuanhuan stood up from his stool and smiled. Although you're a little ugly, you're quite interesting. I'm starting to like you. Don't? Yunruoyan hurriedly said. Ah. Xuanhuan laughed and took out 2 bottles, one white and one black. The white one is the life quintessence pill you gave me last time, and the black one is an antidote. Although it can't cure your poison, it can suppress it to a certain extent. In short, it's all good without any harm. Hey! Just as Yunruoyan called out, Xuanhuan had already placed the 2 bottles on the table and leaped out of the window like a gust of wind. The 2 bottles, one black and one white, stood quietly on the round table. As for Dou Yu and Jin Fei, it was already the 12th day, and they were still wandering around the secret realm. One reason was that Jin Fei's injuries were too severe. Although the wounds had already begun to heal, Jin Fei's weakness hadn't improved in the slightest. For the past few days she could only rely on Dou Yu to carry her. On the other hand, Guiyu deliberately slowed down his pace. Carrying a delicate sickly beauty every day, he didn't feel tired at all. Instead, he enjoyed it very much. If he could have such a beauty on his back all the time, he would really be dissolute even if he became a ghost. As smart as Jin Fei was, of course, she could tell what Dou Yao was thinking, but she didn't dare rush him as she needed his help. She thought to herself that once she got out of the mystic realm, she would definitely make this wretch kneel at her feet and call her great aunt 10,000 times. Only then would she be able to dispel some of the hatred in her heart. Guiyu. While walking leisurely, Dou Yu heard a noise behind him. He turned around and smiled. Sister, you must be hungry. I'll get you something to eat. I'm not hungry. Jin Fei looked at Dou Yu's monkey-like grin, and her already stifled heart grew even more stifled. She wanted nothing more than to fly out of this damned mystic realm. All right, I'm not hungry. Dou Yu went along with her. After all, she was a beauty, and he had always been obedient to her. Dou Yu turned around and continued walking. Jin Fei, who was lying on his body, immediately felt nauseous at the sight of his bald head. She hurriedly called out, Brother, put me down. Dou Yu put her down and she retched twice, but there was nothing to eat. Brother, let's get something to eat, she said weakly as she lay on the grass with her eyes closed. All right, Dou Yu agreed readily. Sister, just you wait. I'll catch a chicken today and make you a beggar's chicken. This is a dish I learned from the old beggars in the city. Dou Yu looked at Jin Fei and found that she was already lying down as if she had fallen asleep. He stopped talking and walked into the forest with a smile. As a 4th-rank blade master, catching a chicken was a piece of cake. Dou Yu prepared the chicken, prepared the wet mud, and went to look for a large leaf that could separate the chicken from the mud. He looked around and suddenly saw a dark green plant in a small corner not far away. Its 2 leaves were just enough to wrap a chicken. But just as he was about to go over and cut off the leaf, he suddenly remembered where he had seen this kind of dark green leaf before. Just thinking about it made Dou Yu's eyes light up. He remembered that this leaf had an extremely enchanting name, Immortal Coil. The leaf contained an extremely potent aphrodisiac, and whether it was a man or a woman, as long as they were poisoned, they would immediately be burned. The only way to detoxify the poison was through intercourse, and he had seen it used in a brothel. Dou Yu's heart began to pound uncontrollably. After a brief moment of consideration, Dou Yu decided to do just that. Then, he pinched off 2 leaves of the immortal coil and wrapped them around the tender pheasant, creating a delicious and poisonous dish of beggar's chicken. Little sister, come and eat the chicken. Dou Yu handed the fragrant drumstick to Jin Fei. Although Jin Fei was very weak, she forced herself to stay awake. These past few days, she had been extremely vigilant of Dou Yu and hadn't let down her guard in the slightest. Brother, you eat too. She looked at Dou Yu and smiled. Although she was extremely hungry, every time she ate she would watch Dou Yu eat first before she ate. Looking at the fragrant drumstick in his hand, Dou Yu steeled himself and took a big bite. Damn it, if I'm poisoned then so be it. There's no one around anyway and I have the antidote in front of me. What's there to be afraid of? Even if I die, I'll die under a beautiful flower. Little sister, come on, try my cooking. Seeing Douyu eat so deliciously, Jin Fei let down her guard and put the drumstick in her mouth. But halfway through the drumstick she felt unbearably hot all over, as if there were ants in her heart. She couldn't help wanting to undo the button that had been buttoned up to her chin. Douyu wasn't much better off, he'd long since taken off his outer shirt. Jin Fei finally realized that there was something wrong with the drumstick in her hand, and she threw it away, looking warily at Douyu. But this time she couldn't look away, because Douyu had become a completely different person in her eyes. Brother Dou, you're not dead. Brother Dou Fei, I've missed you so much. Jin Feier's weak and soft body suddenly gained strength from her excitement, and she threw herself into Douyu's embrace. Brother, I missed you too, sister. Naturally, Douyu wouldn't reject her. The heavenly thunder and earthly fire, the two fiery bodies immediately intertwined together. When the first rays of the morning sun shone into the room, she got up and began to disguise herself. Because she'd washed away the fake scar on her face before going to bed, she was going to make a new one before Peony came to help her wash up. Taking out the bottles that her grandfather had given her from her pocket dimension, she began to put on her unique makeup in front of a mirror. Following her grandfather's instructions, she poured the black and red powders into a cup of water that she'd prepared beforehand. As soon as the two powders mixed in the water, they immediately reacted. The two herbal powders, which were originally green in color, immediately turned into a dark red sticky paste. Lin Zainan had told her that she could mix the two powders in different proportions to create a paste of different colors. She needed the scar on her face to look better than before, or else it would attract attention if it was too serious. What if her grandmother sent a doctor over to look at her wound? She'd turn it dark red today, then turn it black and fall off in 2 days, and then make another birthmark like before. Xuanhuan first applied the ointment that would make her face red and swollen, then applied the sticky substance to the right side of her face. After a short while, the viscous substance dried up and turned into a dark red wound. It was very vivid and lifelike. Xuanhuan looked at herself in the mirror and was very satisfied with the result. Just as she was done, Peony knocked on her door. Come in. Xuanhuan sat in front of her dressing table, waiting for her to brush her hair. Peony set aside the slightly hot water in her hands to cool before helping Xuanhuan wash up. Smiling, she walked up to Xuanhuan's back, picked up a red sandalwood comb and began combing her hair. Miss, are you still going to cultivate today? Peony asked. I'm not going to cultivate today. After breakfast, I'll go to my grandfather's house. Xuanhuan looked at herself in the mirror. Also, don't forget what I told you to do. Peony wouldn't dare forget Mississippi. As Peony combed Xuanhuan's loose hair, she smiled. I'll definitely keep a close eye on this Ling Lan. Xuanhuan's long black hair was tucked into Peony's hands. Xuanhuan had Peony help her with a simple hairstyle, one that wouldn't be as troublesome as before. Peony sighed, thinking back to when she'd been combing Xuanhuan's hair, when Xuanhuan had always been unhappy that her bangs couldn't cover her birthmark. But now Xuanhuan was simply too good, as if she didn't care about her appearance at all. This kind of miss made Peony feel at ease. Miss, in the 2 days since you returned from the Imperial territory, I've noticed that your complexion has gotten better and better. Peony smiled. Is that so? Xuanhuan smiled back. Both master and servant looked delighted. Miss, for example, although your hair used to be fine, it's even more lustrous now. Also, although your skin used to be fair, it's even more translucent now. Now that the poison that had accumulated in her body over the years had been purged, and her cultivation had jumped 3 ranks, it was only natural that she'd look radiant. As Xuanhuan looked at herself in the mirror, she silently told herself, Xuanhuan, you'll get even better. After washing up, Xilan brought over a bowl of bird's nest soup and 2 refreshing desserts. Xuanhuan's appetite immediately soared. She said jokingly. The sun had risen from the west today, and Xilan had actually improved her meals. Xilan also smiled. Miss, I didn't improve your meals. We can't afford a small kitchen, so the old madam had Xiaolan bring it over. Xuanhuan nodded and began to eat the bird's nest soup. It was smooth, light, and refreshing, and she closed her eyes in satisfaction. Her gaze landed on the 2 small bottles at the corner of the table, one white and one black. They had been left behind by the black rogue youth from yesterday. Xuanhuan reached out and picked up the black bottle. As she casually turned it over in her hands, her fingers accidentally touched a bump on the bottom of the bottle. Xuanhuan turned the bottle upside down and discovered that there were 2 words engraved at the bottom. Li San. She frowned slightly. Who's Li San? Chapter 55. Yun Ruoyan still had a mouthful of bird's nest soup in her mouth, but her mind was racing. Li was the surname of the kingdom, and anyone with that surname was bound to be related to the royal family. What did third mean? Was he the third son? Who was the third son of the royal family? Yun Ruoyan swallowed the bird's nest soup in her mouth, her fingers subconsciously tapping her temples. In her past life she had always been self-abased and uninterested in the affairs of the outside world. However, she had been born into a noble family, and her father was an official at court, so it was inevitable that her family would talk about the people and affairs of the royal family. Some things didn't need to be asked, they would naturally enter her ears over time. For example, the current emperor of the Li kingdom, Li Xiu, had 8 princes and 5 princesses. The princes were all dashing and elegant, and the princesses were all as beautiful as flowers. In short, they were all dragons and phoenixes among men. When Yun Ruoyan had been at the family academy, she had often heard of 4 princes. The eldest, Li Qianxiao, was the legitimate son of the emperor and the current crown prince. The second, Li Xuanhuan, was the son of a palace maid, and had the lowest status among the princes. However, he had been close to the crown prince since he was a child, and was now the crown prince's most trusted brother. The third, Li Xuanhuan, was the son of consort Wang Xian. His personality was carefree, and he had the best reputation among the scions of the Li kingdom. The fourth, Li Qianyue, was the 4th prince of the Li kingdom. It was said that he was a child the emperor had brought back from outside the palace, and that he was given special permission by the emperor to move about outside the palace. Few of the scions of the Li kingdom had ever seen his true face. Could Li be the 3rd prince of the Li kingdom, Li Qianhan? Yun Ruoyan's fingers caressed the indentation, and the image of a chiseled face appeared in her mind, as well as a pair of eyes as bright as black pearls. As well as that forceful kiss without any warning. Yun Ruoyan subconsciously brushed her hand across her lips. Li Qianhan. She murmured the name slowly. After breakfast, Yun Ruoyan went to the Lin manor. The Lin sisters hurriedly greeted her and asked if she had been given any trouble upon returning to the Yun manor. Although Lin Zainan didn't say a word, it was clear that he was concerned. Yun Ruoyan described her confrontation with Yun Ruoyao and the others in the Great Hall. Lin Zainan snorted. Everyone in the Yun family is a master at spouting nonsense. More than a decade ago, Yun Lan had managed to seduce Lin Yueme with his flowery words, and Lin Zainan's impression of the Yun family was that they were good at flattery and spouting nonsense. Sister Ruoyan, it's fortunate that you managed to turn the tables on them this time. Otherwise, you'd have been framed for nothing again. Lin Qingxue said indignantly, this is clearly a false accusation. Are the elders of the Yun family all blind? How could they believe such nonsense? Lin Qingxue's thoughts were pure, so she naturally couldn't figure out the twists and turns in this matter. Yun Ruoyan, on the other hand, was well aware that her grandmother and father were more perceptive than anyone else. Now that Yun Ruoyan thought about it, those plots against her weren't very clever, but they had always succeeded. There were only 2 reasons why. First, she was too weak and easy to bully. Even when she was framed, she didn't know how to defend herself, and even held on to the laughable notion of feigning weakness in exchange for a moment of peace. Second, her grandmother and Yun Lan had tacitly agreed to it. In their hearts, Yun Ruoyan was neither beautiful nor talented, and she was no longer suited to be the sole wife-born daughter of the Yun family. If not for the fact that they were wary of Lin Zainan, they wouldn't even have bothered to find an excuse to suppress her. Yun Ruoyan could tell that, although her grandmother didn't have the heart to do anything to her, she was still observing from the sidelines. If Yun Ruoyan really were a worthless piece of mud, she believed that her grandmother would discard her without hesitation. After all, in their hearts, nothing was more important than the interests of the Yun family. Who wouldn't be discarded for the sake of the so-called interests of the family? After a few words, Lin Zainan had the Lin sisters return to their rooms to continue with their homework. Although it was confirmed that they would be able to enter Kongming Academy, Lin Zainan still made sure to pay close attention to their daily homework. Lin Zainan had Yun Ruoyan follow him to his pill-making chambers. The outer chamber was a small room for resting, while the inner chamber was dedicated to refining pills. Without Lin Zainan's permission, no one was allowed to enter. The 2 of them entered the inner chamber, and Lin Zainan pressed a button on the wall, revealing the Lin family's treasury. This was the second time that her grandfather had brought Yun Ruoyan here since they had come to retrieve the core foundation pill. Yun Ruoyan didn't know what her grandfather's intentions were, but she didn't ask. Instead, she waited quietly. Lin Zainan turned around and smiled kindly at her. Ruoyan, come in. Yun Ruoyan paused. She knew how important this treasury was to the Lin family. The last time she had been here, all she had done was stand by the door and wait for her grandfather to bring out the pills. She had never thought of entering. After all, her surname was Yun, and even if this was her grandfather's house, she was still an outsider. "What are you waiting for? Come in." Lin Zainan called out again. Yun Ruoyan could only obediently follow Lin Zainan into the Lin family treasury. Although the door to the secret chamber wasn't large, the interior was spacious. There were many storage racks as well as all sorts of containers for spiritual pills. These are the treasures that the Lin family has accumulated over the centuries, Lin Zainan sighed. Lin Zainan sighed. It's a pity that there's less than a fifth of the shelves and boxes that were once filled to the brim. Lin Zainan walked up to one of the racks and caressed a red box. Yun Ruoyan naturally recognized that box as the one that had once contained the core foundation pill, but it was now empty. The core foundation pill was the last high-grade spiritual pill the Lin family had, and it's all my fault. Lin Zainan blamed himself. I've spent my entire life trying to become a 6th-rank pill master, causing the Lin family's supply of high-grade spiritual pills to fall short. I haven't been able to protect my own flesh and blood, and even now, I don't know if your first and second uncles are still alive. Grandfather, Yun Ruoyan began. You've done your best for the Lin family. You've done your best for me and for my uncles as well. All these years, in order to find Lin Tianming and Lin Tianhai, Lin Zainan had spent almost half of his fortune. Now, for her sake, he had taken out the family's last high-grade spiritual pill, and then traded his cultivation for an antidote. In an instant, he had dropped from a 5th-rank pill master to a 3rd-rank pill master. Yun Ruoyan looked at Lin Zainan's sorrowful expression, her heart aching. Lin Zainan continued, I'm old and I can't improve my cultivation any further. Protecting the 3 of you and the Lin family is my greatest wish. Ruoyan, come over here. Lin Zainan motioned for Yun Ruoyan to come to a shelf, where he took out a white jade box and opened it to reveal a dark green herb. Yun Ruoyan's eyes lit up as she saw a blinding light swirling around the herb. Grandfather, what's this? Yun Ruoyan's eyes suddenly lit up, and the expression on her face fell into Lin Zainan's eyes. He couldn't help but be delighted. Instead of answering, he asked, Ruoyan, can you tell what's different about this herb? Yes, Yun Ruoyan replied. There's spiritual energy flowing around it and it's beautiful. She couldn't help but smile. It's as if a meteor were falling on it. Grandfather, what kind of herb is this? If it could condense spiritual energy on its own, wouldn't it be like the wild vines in the Huang family's imperial territory? Lin Zainan shook his head. This is a treasure of the Lin family, a spirit-testing herb. There are only 2 stocks in the entire Li kingdom. One in Kongming Academy and the other in the Lin family. He looked at Yun Ruoyan excitedly. To most people, this spirit-testing herb is just an ordinary herb, but those who are talented in pill-making can see the light flowing around its surface. The more talented one is, the brighter the light they'll see. Only after entering Kongming Academy and reaching the 7th rank would the scions of the Lin family be qualified to use the spirit-testing herb to determine their talent, and then enter the pill-making hall to be nurtured. The Lin family, on the other hand, could use the spirit-testing herb to determine whether or not their scions had talent for pill-making. Nurtured from a young age, they naturally had many advantages. This was also the main reason why the Lin family had been able to stand as a pill-making family for 100 years. Lin Zainan had also brought the Lin siblings to see the spirit-testing herb. In Lin Qingshua's eyes, the spirit-testing herb was just an ordinary herb, and Lin Qingqian could only see a faint white glow on its surface. Yun Ruoyan turned her gaze from the spirit-testing herb to Lin Zainan. Grandfather, are you saying that I have talent for pill-making? Of course. Lin Zainan replied confidently. You've always had it, but because of the poison suppression, it was temporarily dormant. Now, however, your talent has been awakened. Actually, before Yun Ruoyan was even a year old, Lin Zainan had brought her to see the spirit-testing herb, but she had been too young to remember it. At the time, Lin Zainan had carried her with one arm and opened the box with the other. Yun Ruoyan had immediately pointed at the spirit-testing herb and cried out, Star, star, star. At the time, Lin Zainan had told Lin Yueme that Yun Ruoyan was extremely talented as a pill master, and that she would likely become a great pill master in the future. At the time, he had felt that it was a pity that, because he didn't like the Yun family, he wouldn't be able to personally nurture such a good seedling. All he could do was tell Lin Yueme to have the Yun family nurture Yun Ruoyan well. What he hadn't expected was that after Lin Yueme's death, Yun Ruoyan would deteriorate day by day. Although his heart ached for her, there was nothing he could do. Fortunately, Xuanhuan had finally regained her youthful splendor, and he was confident that his granddaughter's future would be extraordinary. Today, from the moment you walked in, I could tell that you were in high spirits. Lin Zainan stroked his white beard and smiled. Did your cultivation improve again? Indeed, I can't hide anything from you, grandfather. Xuanhuan raised her right hand, her middle finger and index finger pressed together, and spiritual energy pulsed between them. Lin Zainan's eyes widened in disbelief. Ruoyan, you're able to release spiritual energy from your body? Only a 7th rank blade master can do that. Have you already become a 7th rank blade master? Xuanhuan nodded, a faint smile on her face. Ever since the poison was cured, I've been able to cultivate like a god, and I even managed to break through to 7th rank. Xuanhuan considered telling Lin Zainan the secret of the bracelet, but after thinking about it for a moment she realized that sometimes, secrets were a burden. If it wasn't necessary she could carry it on her own. It wasn't that she didn't trust him, but rather that she didn't need to use her own secrets to express her trust in him. She also believed that there was no need for such a relationship between her and her grandfather. That's wonderful. Lin Zainan couldn't help but pat Xuanhuan's shoulder and laugh. Your mother is watching over you. Now that you're a 7th rank blade master, you can begin cultivating as a pill master. Grandfather, I've waited for so many years, and I can finally accept a good disciple. Chapter 56. Lin Zainan couldn't have been more excited about having a successor. He gave Xuanhuan a set of techniques for condensing spiritual fire and instructed her to practice diligently. He also reminded her that condensing spiritual fire wasn't something that could be done in a day, and that she had to work hard but not rush it. After receiving the technique, Xuanhuan had lunch at the Lin Manor before heading back to the Yun Manor. From today onwards, she would have to focus on condensing spiritual fire in addition to her blade master training. Time was also very tight. Lin Qingchen walked Xuanhuan to the door, then took out a thin lotus leaf-shaped veil and handed it to Xuanhuan. What's this? Xuanhuan asked as she held the veil in her hands. I made this. Lin Qingchen took the veil back from Xuanhuan's hands, then stood on her tiptoes and gently placed it on her right cheek. This should do it. Xuanhuan touched the veil on her face, wanting to laugh. Sister Qingchen, you know that the scar on my face is fake and you're just trying to scare people. Wouldn't it not be able to fool people if we covered it up? I know. Lin Qingchen smiled. But people don't know that it's fake and you're infamous for your ugliness, so there's really no need to scare people. Lin Qingchen also teased Xuanhuan, which was rare. Sister Ruoyan, there's no need to kill everyone off at the same time. I'm sure that there'll be people who like you more than your looks. She suddenly smiled mischievously. When the time comes I'll take this off. If that person's sincere they won't be scared. If it's fake they'll probably wet their pants in fright. Wouldn't that be fun? Xuanhuan couldn't help but feel happy when she saw her mature sister reveal such a cute and innocent side. Alright, I'll take it with me. Xuanhuan exclaimed. Let's see how many people I can scare. In front of the Lin Manor, the two sisters looked at each other and laughed. As soon as Xuanhuan returned to her cottage, her grandmother's maid, Xiang, sent word for Xuanhuan to meet her. Xuanhuan followed Xiang into her grandmother's quarters. As soon as she entered, she heard laughter coming from within, and she couldn't help but frown. Ruoyan, you're here. As soon as Xuanhuan entered, her grandmother smiled and waved at her. Yunruoyao, Yunruoyu, Yiqianing, and Pei Zio all turned to look at Yunruoyan. Yunruoyao was dressed in a pinkish-blue robe. Her skin was snow-white and her hair was jet black. Her gait was light and agile, and a lotus leaf veil that was almost the same color as her skin covered her originally ugly birthmark. It was a sight to behold. Grandmother, Yunruoyan hurried forward with a smile. Grandmother, you look so good today. What do you mean by good complexion? Our grandmother's complexion is good every day, Yunruoyu chimed in. Hee hee. Mrs. Yu smiled and said, if you little girls are willing to accompany this old lady, I will be fine every day. The Yun matriarch motioned for Yunruoyan to sit by her side, and Yunruoyan sat down next to the Yun matriarch. Ruoyan, why are you covering your face? Has it gotten worse? The Yun matriarch tugged on Yunruoyan's hand. When I saw your face earlier, I wanted to find a physician, but I didn't want to disturb you because you needed to rest, so I delayed it. Why don't we do it today? The Yun matriarch was about to call for a physician when Yunruoyan hurriedly said, there's no need, grandmother. Grandfather's already examined me while I was at the Lin's, and he even prescribed some medicine for me. Yun Ruoyan removed the lotus leaf veil from her face, revealing the dark red scar. Although it was no longer oozing pus, it was still red and swollen, and it was still uncomfortable. Only then did Yun Ruoyao and the others smile. She was still the same ugly girl from before. "Grandmother, it's much better now. In a couple of days it'll scab over and it'll be as good as before," Yun Ruoyan said. "All right, of course it's the best medicine." The Yun matriarch's eyes were filled with regret. Even if she were to return to her former appearance, there would still be a flaw that couldn't be fixed. "Sister Ruoyan," Pei Zio called out. Ever since Yun Ruoyan had entered the room, his gaze had subconsciously landed on her. "It's been a long time since I last saw you after the expedition. I heard that you were injured, Sister Ruoyan. Are you all right now?" "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for your concern, young Master Pei," Yun Ruoyan replied politely. In the Imperial territory she had made her killing intent so obvious, but Pei Zio was acting as if nothing had happened. What was he up to? "As long as you're fine, as long as you're fine." Pei Zio stood up from his seat and took out a scepter that was about half a foot long. He said to the Yun matriarch, "This is a diamond scepter that my father recently forged. He knows that grandmother likes it, so he ordered me to give it to you to play with." The Yun matriarch loved scepters, and her weapon of choice had been a 2-foot-long scepter when she was young. Although she no longer fought with others, her fondness for the scepter had only increased. "Oh really? Let me have a look." The Yun matriarch motioned for Xiaolan to take the scepter. "Not bad." The Yun matriarch held the scepter in her hands and smiled. "Elder Pei, may I trouble you to use your spiritual energy to forge this for me? My father said that when I was injured, he was a little impatient when he came to the Yun household and offended you. This is a gift of apology, and if you accept it, it would mean that you've forgiven me for my rudeness." Pei Zio bowed humbly. It's understandable that he's anxious for his son. The Yun matriarch handed the scepter to Xiaolan. "It's just that Ruoyan was put in a difficult position that day. You know how precious that core foundation pill is." Yes. Pei Zio hurriedly turned around. "I've always wanted to thank you for saving my life, Ruoyan, but I've never had the opportunity to do so, and we didn't interact much in the Imperial territory." Yun Ruoyan could tell that he was trying to hide what had happened in the Imperial territory from her, and she knew that she wouldn't be able to explain herself if the truth were to be revealed, so she went along with his story. "Don't mention it, young Master Pei," Yun Ruoyan replied coolly, but in her heart, "It's only a matter of time before I kill you." Xianxia, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. "Grandmother, I heard that the phoenix orchids on Minghuang Mountain have bloomed. We sisters haven't had the chance to go out for a stroll since returning from the Imperial territory. Why don't we go out together tomorrow?" "That's right, grandmother, you haven't been out in a long time," Yun Ruoyao added. "The phoenix orchids on Minghuang Mountain have the most spiritual energy, and their fragrance can help you calm down and soothe your insomnia." The Yun matriarch seemed quite interested in their conversation. "Qianxia, that's a good idea. The weather's good these days, so let's go tomorrow." Just as Yun Ruoyan was about to say that she didn't want to go, the Yun matriarch turned to her and said, "Ruoyan, you should go with grandmother tomorrow. It's been many years since we last traveled together, and if I remember correctly, your mother loved phoenix flowers." As the Yun matriarch put it this way, Yun Ruoyan had no choice but to agree. Pei Zio smiled. "Grandmother, I'm the only child in my family, and I'll be lonely even when I travel. Would it be possible to bring me along?" "Sure, the more the merrier." The Yun matriarch nodded. Yun Ruoyan lowered her eyes, her expression unchanging. After leaving the Yun matriarch's residence, Yun Ruoyan walked at the front of the group when Pei Zio suddenly called out to her from behind. Yun Ruoyan turned around and looked at him from the corner of her eyes. Under the afternoon sun, Yun Ruoyan's pinkish-blue dress seemed rather elegant on her slender figure. Without the unsightly scars on her face, she looked stunningly beautiful. Suddenly, Pei Zio felt that Yun Ruoyan's action of stabbing him in the chest in the Imperial territory wasn't a big deal. "Sister Ruoyan," he began. "I was at fault in the Imperial territory. I shouldn't have listened to your sisters and abandoned you, and I shouldn't have allowed them to throw you off in the snake cave. As a result, we're even now, and I don't blame you anymore." "You don't blame me?" Yun Ruoyan looked at him strangely. From his tone, it sounded as if she was looking forward to their reconciliation. "In that case, I have to thank you, young Master Pei." Yun Ruoyan's tone was clearly mocking. "I know you're still angry with me, and Father has reprimanded me for this, telling me to apologize to you. He said that I have to get your forgiveness or he'll scold me again." An aggrieved expression appeared on Pei Zio's handsome face. A 16-year-old boy's expression was still quite alluring to a young girl, such as Yun Ruoyan before her reincarnation, or Yi Qianying now. But to the current Yun Ruoyan, Pei Zio was nothing more than trash. Just as she was about to mock him, she suddenly remembered that she still had to make use of the Pei's. "Uncle, how have you been?" Pei Zio was delighted to see that Yun Ruoyan's attitude had improved. "My father has always been healthy, and he keeps complaining that he didn't treat you well the last time you came to my house. He wants me to invite you over again." "Actually, I know what you're worried about, Uncle," Yun Ruoyan suddenly said. Yun Ruoyan suddenly asked, "Or are you afraid that I'll reveal the secret you revealed in the territory?" The secret Yun Ruoyan was referring to was the Thousand Herb Valley. As for the deaths of the Yu soldiers, they had all been involved and none of them would speak of it. But the Thousand Herb Valley was different. It was a secret that involved the imperial family's interests. Yun Ruoyan's words hit the nail on the head. Only Yun Ruoyan and the Lin sisters knew of this secret and were prejudiced against the Peis. The Lin sisters naturally obeyed Yun Ruoyan, so Pei Yingxiong had given Pei Zio a death order. No matter what, he had to shut her up. "Actually, you don't have to beat around the bush. Just say what you want." Yun Ruoyan crossed her arms in front of her chest. "Last time your family traded for the core foundation pill with a high-grade furnace. This time let's make another deal." Pei Zio's infatuated impression of Yun Ruoyan was instantly doused with a pail of cold water. He asked gloomily, "What deal?" "I have a saber-toothed tiger's tooth here, and I'd like your father to help me forge it into an arrowhead." "Sure," Pei Zio replied. Seeing him agree so readily, Yun Ruoyan couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. "On top of that, a high-grade spiritual pill." "What?" Pei Zio couldn't help but raise his voice. Chapter 57. What's wrong? Yun Ruoyan looked at Pei Zio with a half-smile. "Don't you think this secret is worth it? Then forget it." She turned to leave. "Wait." Pei Zio hurriedly stopped her. "It's a deal." Then he added worriedly, "What if you break your promise and leak the secret after getting these two things?" Yun Ruoyan turned back to him. "I promise you that if you ever find out that I've broken our promise, I'll spend the rest of my life alone." To a woman, no matter how ugly she was, she wanted to marry into a good family. Yun Ruoyan's vow was even more vicious than being struck by lightning. Pei Zio didn't know what to say, but Yun Ruoyan's heart told herself that once she killed him, this vow would automatically be nullified. The saber-toothed tiger's fang wasn't in Yun Ruoyan's hands, but in the Lin manor. She had promised to return it to him after she returned from the Minghuang mountain. As for the high-grade spiritual herb, Pei Zio told Yun Ruoyan that it was too valuable for her to retrieve. "Brother Zio, are you going to let her off so easily?" Yi Qianying appeared from the side after Yun Ruoyan left. Pei Zio sighed. "This secret is very important to the Peis, and I have no choice but to fulfill her request." "Will she keep it a secret just because you fulfill her request?" Yi Qianying looked at Pei Zio. "There's only one kind of person in the world who can truly keep a secret." Pei Zio turned to look at Yi Qianying, and she looked back at him affectionately. "Brother Zio, I'm willing to do anything for you as long as you don't forget your promise to me." That night, Yun Ruoyan sat cross-legged on her bed and began cultivating according to the manual that Lin Zainan had given her. The first page of the manual stated that spiritual energy was formed by the condensation of spiritual energy from heaven and earth, and that spiritual energy was composed of the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. The first step to becoming a pill master was to sense the fire element in one's body, and the manual only contained 4 words: "Sense the spirit with your heart." Yun Ruoyan closed her eyes and tried her best to sense the fire-attuned nature of her spiritual energy according to the manual, but she couldn't seem to grasp the gist of it. She couldn't help but feel a little frustrated. "Mistress, don't forget your grandfather's instructions. You have to be diligent, not anxious." Qiuqiu could sense Yun Ruoyan's impatience and reminded her. Hearing Qiuqiu's words, Yun Ruoyan slowly exhaled and calmed herself down. "Qiuqiu, do you have any quick-fix methods?" "Master." Qiuqiu's tone was earnest and sincere. "More haste, less speed. The so-called rapid cultivation methods on the Xuanhuan continent are all unorthodox. But if I cultivate slowly like this, when will I be able to achieve anything?" As far as Yun Ruoyan knew, it had taken Lin Zainan 3 years to sense the fire-attuned nature of his spiritual energy, and another 2 years to fully awaken the fire-attuned nature of his spiritual energy and condense it into spiritual fire. This meant that Xuanhuan would have to wait another 5 years before she could successfully refine a pill. She really couldn't afford to wait that long. There's no other way. Unless there's an opportunity, I'll have to take it slow. The so-called opportunity was to obtain the antidote that Xuanhuan had used to cure the poison in her body. With Qiuqiu's help, she had managed to jump 3 ranks in one go and become a 7th rank blade master. However, this sort of opportunity was something that could only be chanced upon. Qiuqiu, don't you have a particularly powerful pillmaster cultivation technique? Only blade masters rely heavily on their techniques. For pillmasters and forge masters, the most important thing isn't their techniques, but their talent and luck. Qiuqiu told Xuanhuan that becoming a blade master was the foundation of all cultivators. Through cultivation, a cultivator could open their spiritual vortex and increase the spiritual energy within their body. As for how to convert spiritual energy into spiritual energy, that depended on the cultivator's own talent. If one's talent wasn't high enough, they could use spiritual pills or fire-attuned beast cores to forcibly enhance their spiritual energy. However, that would result in impure spiritual energy, and unless it was absolutely necessary, it was best not to resort to such a method. Qiuqiu's words completely dispelled Xuanhuan's thoughts of taking shortcuts. Be diligent, be patient. She kept repeating these words to herself, almost as if she were hypnotizing herself. After repeating them a full 10 times, she closed her eyes and continued to feel her surroundings. I don't have a technique that can increase a pillmaster's cultivation, but I do have a pill refining manual. Just as Xuanhuan thought that Qiuqiu had fallen asleep, it suddenly spoke up. What manual? Xuanhuan immediately opened her eyes. Is it amazing? Amazing. There's almost no one on the entire Xianhuan continent who could rival it. Qiuqiu boasted proudly. What manual is it? Quick, let me see. Xuanhuan closed her eyes and entered the pocket dimension in her bracelet. Quick, let me see. This time, it wasn't Qiuqiu that was running circles around Xuanhuan, but Xuanhuan who was chasing after it. Qiuqiu immediately regretted its words, but it couldn't stand Xuanhuan's pestering. In the end, it made a request. The book could only be read, not flipped. In other words, it could show Xuanhuan the book's cover, but she couldn't open it. What? Xuanhuan didn't understand. Because this is a book that contains all the poisons in the world. As it spoke, Qiuqiu took out a book from nowhere and held it with its 2 tiny paws, not even letting Xuanhuan touch it. Xuanhuan could only see that the cover of the book was pure black, and on it were 4 large blood-red words. Poison dominates the world. It was quite domineering. You can't touch this book right now, much less read it. Qiuqiu's tone was very serious. Only when you reach your grandfather's level can you refine the poisons in this book. But are you sure you want to refine a poison pill? This is something harmful, and I doubt your grandfather would like it. In her past life, Xuanhuan had drunk the poison that Yi Qianying had given her. Since Yi Qianying was able to concoct a powder that could control magical beasts, she must have done some research on poisons as well. No one else needs to know about this, Xuanhuan replied. As for those who've harmed me before and those who intend to harm me in the future, I won't go easy on them. So what if I have to resort to unscrupulous means? As long as you've decided, Qiuqiu replied. Xuanhuan encouraged herself. Since I can't rush it, I'll have to do it slowly. Xuanhuan was just about to close her eyes and continue sensing the fire element when she suddenly heard a noise from the window. That fellow's here again, Qiuqiu yawned in Xuanhuan's mind. Xuanhuan couldn't even be bothered to ask who it was. Instead, she reached for the gauze by her side and placed it on her right cheek. Because the ointment had been stuck on her face for a long time, she always felt uncomfortable. Therefore, she had to wash it off before going to bed every day when conditions permitted. The gauze came in handy at this point, and Xuanhuan even considered wearing it when she slept in the future. Oh, you've finally figured out how to make yourself less frightening? Xuanhuan blurted out as soon as he saw Xuanhuan. Xuanhuan mimicked his tone and teased, You haven't improved at all. The first day I saw you, you were acting like a gentleman on a beam and you're still the same. If you've got the guts, why don't you walk through the front door for once? This time, Xuanhuan didn't enter the room. Instead, he sat on the windowsill and smiled. That's not difficult, but it's a little troublesome to gather so many people. How can there be such a convenient way to come and go like the wind? Xuanhuan acutely picked up on the part of his words, and she was even more certain of his identity as a member of the imperial family. Who's Li San? She didn't beat around the bush. Xuanhuan looked at Xuanhuan in surprise. How do you know my nickname? You're Li San? Yun Ruoyan had thought that Li San was that person, but she hadn't expected him to be this black-robed youth. You're the third prince of the Li Kingdom, Li Qianhuan? That's right. Not only wasn't Li Qianhuan angry that his identity had been revealed, he even seemed very happy. I'm the carefree and uninhibited third prince, Li Qianhuan. Tell me, how did you guess? Yun Ruoyan frowned as she tossed a bottle to him. Why does the bottle he gave you have your nickname engraved on it? Li Qianhuan caught the bottle and slapped his forehead with the fan in his hand. How could I be so careless as to give you a bottle with my name engraved on it? If Uncle finds out, he'll beat me to death. If Uncle. Yun Ruoyan immediately identified two keywords. It seemed that the antidote hadn't been given by that person, but rather a gift from Li Qianhuan. And that person was none other than Li Qianhuan's uncle. As soon as the word uncle left his mouth, Li Qianhuan immediately realized that he'd said the wrong thing, and slapped his own mouth with the fan. Since you've already said it, why don't you just tell me everything? Which uncle of yours? I didn't say anything, I really didn't say anything. If he asks, just say that you guessed it yourself. With that, Li Qianhuan disappeared like a gust of wind. Uncle. Yun Ruoyan stared at the empty window, trying to sort out her thoughts. Li Qianhuan's uncle was the younger brother of the current emperor, Li Xiu. The current emperor had two older brothers, one younger brother and two younger sisters. If Yun Ruoyan remembered correctly, there had been a national funeral last year, during which one of the emperor's brothers had passed away. Another was even older than her father, Yun Lan, so there was only one left. It can't be him, can it? Yun Ruoyan couldn't help but feel a chill run down her spine. The emperor's younger brother was called Li Mo, and he was the youngest son of the previous emperor. It was said that he was incredibly talented, possessing both talents as a pillmaster and a summoner, and that his cultivation was extremely high. Having only one talent would require a great deal of spiritual energy to cultivate, let alone having both talents at the same time. Yun Ruoyan didn't even dare imagine that such a person existed. But that wasn't the most frightening aspect of him. What was frightening about him was that he was extremely bloodthirsty. He had joined the army on the battlefield at the age of 10, became a general at the age of 15, and quelled a beastkin rebellion for the first time at the age of 17. He ordered the 50,000 beastkin captives to be slaughtered, and it was said that the entire Li River was dyed red with their blood. The thick stench of blood carried the northern winds all the way to the foot of the capital. From that moment on, the beastkin no longer had the strength to resist, and Li Mo was given the nickname of the Slaughtering King. That chiseled face, that pair of eyes that glowed like black pearls, appeared in Yun Ruoyan's mind once more. Yun Ruoyan, who had lived 2 lives, couldn't help but shiver at the sight. Chapter 58. Early the next morning, Xiao Lan, who worked in the Yun matriarch's courtyard, brought over some nutritious food for Yun Ruoyan's breakfast. She also informed Yun Ruoyan of the approximate time the Yun family's carriages would be departing for the Minghuang mountain, and told her not to be late. Because of the old mistress's presence, it was considered a more formal outing, so all the young ladies had to bring their own maids. Peony was more quick-witted, so Yun Ruoyan left her behind to keep an eye on Ling Lan. Yun Ruoyan decided to bring Xilan along with her. This is your first time going out with the young mistress. You need to be smart, Peony reminded Xilan again as they left. I know, Sister Peony. Xilan tugged at Peony's arm. When I come back, I'll bring you Li's almond cakes. As soon as Yun Ruoyan and Xilan stepped out of the gates, they saw 4 carriages waiting for them. The first carriage was pulled by 2 horses and was very wide. The body of the carriage was made of mahogany with purple muslin curtains. It looked very luxurious. Needless to say, this carriage was prepared for the old grandmother. The second carriage was slightly smaller and had a blue gauze curtain around it. It also looked nice. Although the third carriage was also good, it couldn't be compared to the other 2. There were no curtains, only ordinary curtains, and the space inside seemed to be even smaller. Sister Ruoyan. Just then Yi Qianying opened the curtains of the third carriage and beckoned to Yun Ruoyan. Why don't you ride with me? Ignoring Yi Qianying, Yun Ruoyan headed straight for the second carriage. Just as he reached the carriage, Yun Ruoyu's voice came from behind him. That's our carriage. Yun Ruoyan turned back to see Yun Ruoyu and Yun Ruoyao walking in her direction with their maids in tow. Miss Wei. Xilan subconsciously tugged on her arm and pulled her back. She glanced at Xilan out of the corner of her eye, her gaze so cold that Xilan couldn't help but let go of her in fright. In her cottage, Xilan and Peony were the 2 maids who had been by her side for the longest time. Peony, on the other hand, was a smart girl. She often followed Yun Ruoyan to visit her grandmother and Yun Lan in the front yard. Lan was a silly and dutiful girl. She had always been used as a lowly servant, usually in charge of Yun Ruoyan's food and clothing. Today was the first time she had gone out with Yun Ruoyan. In the past, Yun Ruoyan had always been timid, and she had always given in to others. Lan's temper was originally quite fierce, but after suffering a loss outside and having no one to protect her after a long time, she also restrained her timid appearance. Although things had gotten a little better during this period of time, when Lan saw Yun Ruoyao and Yun Ruoyu, the memories of how she had been suppressed by them came flooding back. She couldn't help but be afraid. She didn't even dare to raise her head. Yun Ruoyan turned to Lan. Straighten your back. With me around, no one in the Yun family will be able to bully you. Lan was stunned for a moment. Her terrified face was finally replaced by a smile. She responded crisply, immediately raising her head high, almost pointing her nose at Yun Ruoyan. The master and servant boarded the second carriage in a dignified manner. Sister Ruoyao, look at her. Yun Ruoyu couldn't help but be a little angry that Yun Ruoyan had completely ignored her words. Yun Ruoyao and Yun Ruoyu stood on the steps, looking at the two carriages, unsure whether to board or not. The second miss is getting more and more arrogant. This carriage with the blue curtains has always been used by the first miss and third miss, and the second miss has even learned to steal it. Yun Ruoyao and Yun Ruoyu's two maids stood behind their respective misses, their tone very dissatisfied with Yun Ruoyan's behavior. That's right, she's getting more and more unruly. Oh? I don't know the rules. Yun Ruoyan lifted the curtains, her cold gaze sweeping past Yun Ruoyao and Yun Ruoyu, landing directly behind them. Xiaohong xianxia. She smiled coldly. Sisters, may I trouble you to come up and teach me, the second daughter of the Yun family, what rules are? When Xiaohong and xianxia raised their heads and met Yun Ruoyan's cold gaze, they were momentarily stunned. They had seen this so-called second miss of the Yun family quite a few times in the past. Even when she spoke to their maids, she would speak softly to them, let alone look at them coldly. But Yun Ruoyan, who had never given anyone a cold shoulder before, was still a little fearful of them. He wasn't afraid of her as a person but of her identity. The two maids stood there unsure of how to respond. At this time Yun Ruoyao smiled. Us two maids have been spoiled too much, so please don't take their words to heart, Sister Ruoyan. That's right, Sister Ruoyan, why are you so angry today? You can have the carriage, Yun Ruoyu said sarcastically. I'm not angry, but I didn't understand what you said just now. Yun Ruoyan's lips curled up in a cold smile. Why don't I ask grandmother for guidance when she arrives? You? Yun Ruoyu wanted to speak, but Yun Ruoyao raised a hand to stop her. Yun Ruoyao's face darkened as she turned her head. Xiaohong xianxia, go apologize to the second miss. Seeing that their mistress was protecting them, Xiaohong and xianxia didn't look as fearful as before. The two of them reluctantly walked to the side of the carriage with a trace of arrogance on their faces. Just as they were about to speak, they suddenly heard two loud slaps, and half of their faces burned with pain. Yun Ruoyao and Yun Ruoyan hadn't expected Lan to hit them, and they didn't know how to react. You dare hit me? Xiaohong was the first to react. She pointed at Lan and glared at her. I hit you on behalf of my mistress. Lan straightened her neck. You need to be taught a lesson. The mistress was afraid that she wouldn't be able to control her strength and beat you to death. Although Lan was not a cultivator, she had been doing rough labor for a long time, so the strength of her hands was much stronger than that of ordinary maidservants. Xiaohong and xianxiao's faces immediately turned red and swollen. These two servants were used to being domineering among the servants of the Yun manor because of their mistress, and they'd never been humiliated like this before. Anger immediately rushed to their heads, and they actually reached out to grab Lan, intending to drag her off the carriage. How dare you? Yun Ruoyan snorted coldly, grabbing Xiaohong and xianxiao's hands that were gripping Lan's arms. At the same time she circulated the spiritual energy in her spiritual vortex to her fingertips, and then lightly pressed her fingers against Xiaohong and xianxiao's wrists. The two maidservants instantly felt as if an electric current had entered their bodies from their wrists. It was as if a needle had directly pierced into their hearts. The pain was incomparable, and they opened their mouths to let out a blood-curdling scream. Ah! Yun Ruoyan released her grip, and the spiritual energy returned to the two servants. Their pain instantly vanished and they couldn't help but take 2 steps back, staring at Yun Ruoyan in fear. Yun Ruoyan still had a cold smile on her face as she looked at the two arrogant servants. As the saying went, when you beat a dog you had to look at its master. This time Xuanhuan was the one who'd beaten the dog. Under Xuanhuan's cold gaze, the two servants felt their legs turn to jelly, and they knelt down with a thud. "Second miss, we were wrong. Second miss, please spare us." The two servants kowtowed and begged for mercy. Just then the Yun matriarch walked out of the carriage, supported by Xiaolan, and Madame An followed behind her. When Madame An saw the two servants kowtowing to Yun Royao, she asked, "What's going on? Who was the one shouting just now?" Yun Royan's cold expression faded, and she smiled apologetically at the two servants. "Mother's asking you a question, hurry up and answer her." She reached out to help them up. Qiuhong and Lan Xiang had been frightened out of their wits by Yun Royan's outburst, and they didn't dare let Yun Royan touch them again. They hurriedly turned around and knelt in front of Madame N, muttering, "I was rude just now and offended you, Second Mississippi. I'm willing to accept my punishment." Madame Anne's face darkened, and she glanced at Yun Royao and Yun Ruoyu. Yun Royao and Yun Ruoyu on the other hand looked at each other, confused. Neither of them understood what had just happened. But the Yun matriarch smiled. As she helped Xiaolan into the carriage, she said slowly, "Some servants need to be taught a lesson, or they'll go against the heavens." Seeing that neither of her daughters had spoken, and the Yun matriarch had spoken again, Madame An casually scolded Qiuhong and Lan Xiang before following the Yun matriarch into the first carriage. They were about to set off, but Yun Ruoyao and Yun Ruoyu still hadn't boarded their carriages. Both of them had brought their servants with them, and the six of them couldn't squeeze into one carriage. However, neither of them was willing to sit alone with Yun Ruoyan. Just as the two of them were in a dilemma, Yi Qianying alighted from her carriage and walked up to them. "Sisters, why don't you sit in my carriage? I'll sit with Sister Ruoyan." Naturally, the two of them couldn't have asked for more. On the carriage, Yun Ruoyan tilted her head and looked out the window, too lazy to pay any attention to Yi Qianying's beautiful smile. On the other hand, Xilan and Yi Qianying's maid, Huan, were chattering away the entire way, and Yun Ruoyan didn't pay much attention to them as they chatted about mundane topics such as how to make desserts or how to make soup. The sun was shining brightly outside the window. Before it was midsummer, the sun wouldn't scorch anyone. The wind was gentle, and as it caressed her face, it made her feel very comfortable. Yun Ruoyan narrowed her eyes. If only there weren't that annoying fellow by her side. Yi Qianying's gaze uncontrollably landed on Yun Ruoyan's body. Yun Ruoyan was dressed in a pink chiffon dress that accentuated her snow-white skin. Even the lotus leaf gauze covering her scars made her look as beautiful as a peach blossom. Yi Qianying couldn't help but be shocked. How could this ugly girl become so beautiful after covering up her scars? No wonder she felt that Brother Zio's gaze toward Yun Ruoyan was different from before. In the past, although Pei Zio had been very attentive to Yun Ruoyan, Yi Qianying could tell from his gaze that he was suppressing a strong sense of disgust toward Yun Ruoyan. But now, that sense of disgust was fading, replaced by a complex emotion that made Yi Qianying feel very uneasy. Brother Zio is mine, and no one can steal him from me, much less an ugly girl. Yi Qianying's smile didn't waver, but the handkerchief in her hand had been twisted out of shape. She recalled that Pei Zio had finally agreed to her arrangement after her earnest and well-meaning persuasion yesterday, and the smile on her face deepened. "Even if you don't die today, you'll at least lose a layer of skin." Chapter 59. As soon as the carriages reached the foot of the mountain, Pei Zio, who had been waiting for them all this time, hurried over. "Grandmother, Aunt Yun." Pei Zio bowed in front of the Yun matriarch and Madame, and unfortunately, the emperor is hunting on the Minghuang mountain, so I'm afraid we won't be able to go up. However, the phoenix flowers are in full bloom. Zio has already prepared the tea and pastries. What do you think? "That's fine," the Yun matriarch smiled. "I didn't want to climb so high in the first place, so it's fine to stay halfway up the mountain." Pei Zio nodded and gestured for the group to enter a human-powered palanquin. This human-powered palanquin was different from the palanquins that Yun Ruoyan and Yun Ruoyan usually sat on. It was made from two very thick bamboo poles with a bamboo chair in the middle. The person sitting on the bamboo chair would be carried up the mountain by two burly men in the front and back. Experienced palanquin bearers could ensure that no matter how rugged the path beneath their feet, the chair would always shake the same, making the person sitting on it feel as if they were floating in the clouds, enjoying the beautiful scenery as they floated up the mountain. None of the nobles of the Li Kingdom disliked this sort of luxury, and some would even keep such palanquin bearers as they ascended the mountain. Naturally, Yun Ruoyan liked it as well. The Yun matriarch, Madame and Yun Ruoyao all boarded the palanquin, and Yi Qianying motioned for Yun Ruoyan to sit on the one in front of her. Yun Ruoyan glanced casually at the two burly men carrying her palanquin. Seeing that they were strong and muscular, she nodded in satisfaction and sat down. Yi Qianying was delighted. She had hired these two burly men at a high price. By the time the palanquin reached the middle of the mountain, the slightest misstep would cause Yun Ruoyan to fall off the cliff. Although the cliff of the Minghuang mountain wasn't a bottomless abyss, it was riddled with jagged rocks of all shapes and sizes. If a person were to fall off, they would at least lose a layer of skin. The Yun matriarch's palanquin was at the very front, followed by Madame N, then Yun Ruoyao and Yun Ruoyu, followed by Yun Ruoyan and finally Pei Zio. Pei Zio's gaze went past Yi Qianying and landed on Yun Ruoyan. Her hair was as black as the clouds, and her figure was slender and graceful. She was dressed in a pink muslin dress that fluttered in the wind, and she seemed to exude an ethereal aura. From time to time she would glance at her from the side. Her nose was high and her lips were plump. Her beauty had long since surpassed Yi Qianying's. Pei Zio had once heard from his father, Pei Xiong, that Yun Ruoyan's mother, Lin Yueme, had once been a famous beauty in the Li Kingdom. Her daughter wouldn't be ugly, but Yun Ruoyan had a bright red birthmark on her face, ruining her beautiful face. Not too long ago, her birthmark had even been cut open, leaving behind a scar. Pei Zio still felt a little nauseous when he thought back to the pus that had flowed out of her face in the imperial territory. However, scars could heal. Yesterday, in the Yun matriarch's courtyard, Pei Zio had seen that the scars on Yun Ruoyan's face were almost completely healed. If only he could find an elixir that could cure birthmarks. Pei Zio could not help but let his imagination run wild. The group had already reached the steepest part of the mountain path. On one side of the path was a cliff, and on the other side there was another cliff. Pei Zio focused his attention on Yun Ruoyan in front of him. He knew of Yi Qianying's plan. Although he was a little conflicted, he had always known which choice would be most beneficial to him, so he had gritted his teeth and agreed. But now, as Pei Zio looked at Yun Ruoyan's beautiful back, he suddenly felt a sense of longing that he had never felt before, tugging at his heart. This tugging at his heart caused him to lose control for a moment. Without even realizing it, he called out, "Sister Ruoyan." When Yun Ruoyan heard Pei Zio's voice, she turned her head slightly. Just then, the sedan that was carrying her began to tilt toward the side of the cliff. By the sedan, Xilan was so frightened that she cried out, "Miss," but she was walking in the middle and the sedan was too high for her to reach. All she could do was watch as Yun Ruoyan's body tilted toward the side of the cliff. A smile appeared on Yi Qianying's face. She could see the Grim Reaper waving at Yun Ruoyan. Just then Pei Zio, who was behind her, leaped up and to Yi Qianying's shock, reached out to grab Yun Ruoyan. But what Pei Zio didn't expect was that Yun Ruoyan would be so calm and collected in the face of such sudden danger. Although half of her body was tilting, her body was as light as a swallow. Grabbing the bun on the head of the burly man in front of him, he spun around and kicked the face of the burly man behind him. Using the force of the kick, his body stood firmly on the mountain path. "Sister Ruoyan, are you all right?" Pei Zio landed on the ground as well, his eyes full of concern for Yun Ruoyan. Yun Ruoyan clasped her hands behind her back, her eyes full of mockery. She turned to look at the dumbfounded Yi Qianying, then walked up to Pei Zio, stood on her tiptoes and whispered into his ear, "You're all too young to want to harm me." Yun Ruoyan had lived 2 lives and her combined age was more than 30. Even a careless laugh from Yi Qianying wouldn't escape her notice. Moreover, Yun Ruoyan had heard of this trick being used in her past life. As a result, when Yi Qianying beckoned for her to sit in the sedan, Yun Ruoyan was already on guard. Pei Zio choked on his words. "The deal has changed." Yun Ruoyan waved 2 fingers in front of Pei Zio's eyes. 2 high-grade spiritual pills. While Pei Zio was speechless, Yun Ruoyan continued coldly, "This is the price you have to pay for your tricks. Miss." Xilan looked at her mistress in shock, her eyes red. "It's nothing." Yun Ruoyan smiled at her lightly. The people in front didn't know what was happening behind them, and the sedan had already turned a corner. You get up and continue walking." Yun Ruoyan pointed at the 2 bearers on the ground. One of the bearers had had his hair pulled out, and the other had a tooth knocked out. Now that they knew how formidable Yun Ruoyan was, they didn't dare play any more tricks, and they steadily carried Yun Ruoyan up the mountain. The Yun matriarch, Madame N, and the Yun sisters had been sitting in the pavilion for a while before they saw Yun Ruoyan's sedan slowly ascend. "What took you so long?" the Yun matriarch asked. "Oh, I had a stomachache just now, so I went to relieve myself," Yi Qianying hurriedly replied. Yun Ruoyan didn't intend to expose her because based on her past experience, as long as the family's interests weren't harmed, the elders of the Yun family would try to keep the peace. What he said was equivalent to not saying anything. It was better to save some saliva. Everyone sat together in the pavilion, eating the pastries that Pei Zio had prepared and chatting idly. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew past, and the surrounding pink phoenix flowers fell to the ground, their fragrance wafting through the air. Everyone inhaled deeply, intoxicated by the fragrance. Madame Min suggested that everyone split up to play, leaving Yun Ruoyan to take care of her grandmother. The maidservants were also allowed to play by themselves, and Xilan happily followed them into the phoenix orchid forest. She told Yun Ruoyan that she wanted to take advantage of this opportunity to collect some phoenix petals to make into pastries. Yun Ruoyan found a quiet place to rest, sat down cross-legged, and began to sense the fire-attuned spiritual energy in her body. Pei Zio was frustrated by the complicated feelings in his heart, and he vented his anger on Xianxia. After making a face at her, he entered the forest alone with his servant. Xianxia felt both aggrieved and resentful, and tears flowed uncontrollably down her cheeks. "Miss, don't be sad," Xiang comforted her. The maid Xiang comforted her. She couldn't understand how young Master Pei could bear to give her a hard time when her young miss was beautiful and had a good personality. Xianxia looked at Xiang tearfully. Suddenly she had an idea. "Xiang, how do I usually treat you?" "Miss, you treat me like family," Xiang replied, her eyes brimming with loyalty. Xianxia was very satisfied. She had lived under someone else's roof for so many years that she had learned to read people's expressions and by their hearts. She had spent a great deal of effort to cultivate Xiang. "In that case, I want you to do something for me. Are you willing?" "As long as it's within my power, I'll try my best." "Good, Xiang." Xianxia looked like she was about to cry again. "When I marry into the Pei family, I'll definitely find a good husband for you, and let you have a taste of being a wife." Yun Ruoyan was immersed in her cultivation when she suddenly heard someone calling her anxiously. She ended her cultivation and walked out of the forest, just in time to see Xiang looking for her anxiously. "Second Miss, something's wrong." Xiang rushed over as soon as she saw Yun Ruoyan. Yun Ruoyan frowned. "What's wrong?" "Xilan she." Xiang swallowed her saliva. "What happened to Xilan?" Yun Ruoyan asked quickly. "Xilan accidentally entered the Imperial hunting grounds and hasn't come out for a long time. I don't know if she's been caught as an assassin. Second Miss, come with me quickly. If you're mistaken for an assassin, you'll be shot on the spot." The anxious look on Xiang's face was so real that Yun Ruoyan didn't have time to think. She immediately followed her into the depths of the forest. After walking for about 5 minutes, Xiang brought Yun Ruoyan to a deep ravine in the depths of the forest. There was a single log bridge over the ravine. Xiang pointed to the other side of the ravine. "Over there," Xilan said she smelled camellias there, and said she wanted to pick some camellias to make a pillow for you, Mississippi. Then she went over and hasn't returned since. "If you knew that was a forbidden area, why didn't you stop her?" Yun Ruoyan asked. "I did," Xiang hurriedly said. "But she said there was no one here and that she'd be back soon. She even said she'd make a camellia pillow for me." Without waiting for Xiang to finish speaking, Yun Ruoyan had already gone over. As a living person, Yun Ruoyan was very concerned about those who were truly good to her. Whether it was the Lin sisters in the imperial territory or the 2 maids by her side, she was willing to take risks for them. Xianxia had grasped this mentality of Yun Ruoyan's. She had failed to harm her several times, but this time she had done so. Yun Ruoyan quickly searched for Xilan's figure in the forbidden area, but after 5 minutes she had already searched the entire periphery, and there was no sign of Xilan. Only then did Yun Ruoyan begin to have some doubts. She cursed inwardly. Sure enough, she was too concerned. Just as she was about to return, she suddenly heard a shout not far away. She hurriedly hid under a thick phoenix tree. The assassin ran that way. Chase after her. There were 7 or 8 people in that group, all dressed in the uniform of the Imperial Guards. They shouted as they ran in Yun Ruoyan's direction. Yun Ruoyan held her breath, retracted her aura, and hid her small body behind the trunk of the tree. The group of people almost brushed past the side of the tree that Yun Ruoyan was hiding behind. It was only when the footsteps of the group of people gradually faded away that Yun Ruoyan dared to poke her head out a little. Suddenly Yun Ruoyan felt a cold sensation on her forehead. A faint smell of blood accompanied a drop of cold liquid that slid down Yun Ruoyan's forehead to the bridge of her nose. She wiped it with her hand and looked in front of her eyes. Sure enough, it was blood. Just as Yun Ruoyan raised her head to look up, an inky black cloud floated down and enveloped Yun Ruoyan. Yun Ruoyan's vision turned pitch black. She struggled to rush out of this darkness, but her hands were suddenly grabbed by an unknown pair of hands. She subconsciously opened her mouth to scream, but then a piece of ice-cold softness touched her lips, blocking her voice and her breath. This cold touch caused the image of a chiseled face to appear in Yun Ruoyan's mind, as well as a pair of pitch-black eyes that glowed with an icy light. It's him. Yun Ruoyan slowly opened her eyes in the darkness. Chapter 60. He was the legendary slaughtering king. When Yun Ruoyan thought of this, she struggled even more fiercely. However, his hands were so strong that they clasped tightly around her wrists, making it impossible for her to break free. Yun Ruoyan channeled the spiritual energy in her Dantian's spiritual vortex to the tips of her middle fingers. Her slender fingers lightly tapped the webbing between her thumb and forefinger, but the man didn't loosen his grip as she'd expected, nor did he cry out in pain. Instead, the hands around Yun Ruoyan's wrists tightened, and Yun Ruoyan's heart tightened. What a profound cultivation, and what a powerful spiritual vortex. He'd actually absorbed the spiritual energy of her attack. Don't move and don't scream or I'll eat you. The man's magnetic and icy voice rang out by Yun Ruoyan's ear, and she really didn't dare move a muscle. In the darkness, Yun Ruoyan felt the man's chin on her shoulder, his slightly heavy breath tickling her ears. Chio. Just as Yun Ruoyan was at a loss for what to do, Chio's voice rang out in her mind. Mistress, this man's very strong, don't provoke him. I know. Yun Ruoyan replied helplessly. In the Li Kingdom, everyone above the age of 3 knew of the slaughtering king. Even on the entire Xuanhuan continent he was one of the best. But Yun Ruoyan had never imagined that she'd one day be in such close contact with such a person. But what should I do now? She asked. I don't know either. In any case, don't provoke him. Chio didn't say anything at all. Yun Ruoyan took a deep breath, and the faint, sweet smell of blood wafted up to her nose once more. She quickly regained her composure. Are you hurt? In the darkness, Li Mo's brows furrowed slightly, and his thin lips parted slightly. But before he could make a sound, the sound of the guards' voices rang out once more. And from the sound of it they seemed to be rushing over. Li Mo wrapped his long arms around Yun Ruoyan's petite body, then leapt into the air with the tip of his foot. Under the phoenix orchid tree, several groups of guards met up. Have you found any traces of the assassin? A guard captain asked. No, but the guards everywhere are very strict. The assassin should still be in the hunting ground and has no chance to escape. All right, increase the security. Don't let even a mosquito fly out. The guard captain waved his hand. Yes. The soldiers received their orders and dispersed. No one noticed that above their heads, a man and a woman were wrapped in a black cloak under the cover of a pink phoenix corolla. They've left. Can you let me go now, slaughtering king? Yun Ruoyan murmured in a slightly low voice. Li Mo raised his brows, the corners of his mouth curving upwards. He spread his arms to his sides, and his inky cloak spread out like the wings of an eagle, releasing Yun Ruoyan from his embrace. Yun Ruoyan felt the darkness dissipate, and in front of her was a tall man shrouded in a black cloak. Behind him was a world of pink phoenix flowers. One black and one red, both incomparably dazzling. You actually guessed my identity? Li Mo's voice was tinged with interest. Xuanhuan seems to be getting more and more inept at handling matters. Li Mo wore a hood that concealed most of his face, revealing only his chiseled chin. Although he was just standing there with his hands behind his back, Yun Ruoyan could still feel a faint pressure emanating from his body. She was a little puzzled. Why hadn't she felt this pressure the first time he'd fallen into her courtyard, but now? It seemed that she'd been intimidated by the title of the slaughtering king. According to the common folk, although he was only in his early 20s, he was more than 10 feet tall, and had the strength to uproot mountains and rivers. He could summon 10,000 beasts with a single roar, and he even liked to eat human flesh. Young boys and girls of Yun Ruoyan's age had all grown up hearing such rumors, and their hearts had long since been imprinted with fear and respect. As a result, when the real person was standing right in front of them, they couldn't help but revere the man in front of them. Actually, there wasn't anything special about this man. He was just a little taller and his cultivation a little higher. Furthermore, like everyone else, he could be injured. As Yun Ruoyan thought of this, the fear and respect in her heart began to dissipate bit by bit. Thank you for the life quintessence pill. Yun Ruoyan smiled faintly. Although it won't be of much use to me, I'm still grateful. The poison in your body has been cured? Liemo stepped forward and reached out to brush away the lotus leaf gauze covering Yunruoyan's face. Yunruoyan wanted to dodge, but the space between them was too limited, and Liemo's movements were too fast. By the time she dodged, the gauze had already fallen into Liemo's hands. Yunruoyan clutched her right cheek and glared at him. The feeling of helplessness in front of someone suddenly surged up, a feeling she hadn't felt since her rebirth. She hated this feeling of helplessness. Why are you covering your face? It's not like I've never seen you in such an ugly state. Liemo's voice was cold and mocking. Yunruoyan removed her hand in a fit of pique, revealing the fake scar on her face. The first time they met, Liemo could easily tell that Yunruoyan was poisoned, and Yunruoyan was a little worried that he would be able to tell that the scar on her face was fake. It looks like you've recovered a lot. Liemo handed the gauze back to Yunruoyan. Yunruoyan took the gauze back and said angrily, "So you don't have to worry about me in the future, slaughtering king? We'll meet again, no, never again." She turned around and was about to jump down from the tree when Liemo grabbed her by the shoulder. "What are you doing?" Yunruoyan turned around and struck Liemo's chest without hesitation. She had used her spiritual energy in this blow, and Liemo took a step back with a muffled grunt, blood dripping from his chin. This was out of Yunruoyan's expectations. Liemo's cultivation was very high, and even if she had used 70% of her spiritual energy, she wouldn't have been able to make him vomit blood. Moreover, Yunruoyan had only used less than half of her spiritual energy. "Your injuries aren't light," Yunruoyan commented. Liemo raised his arm, revealing his slender fingers beneath his cloak. He used his index finger to wipe away the blood at the corner of his mouth, and his voice was low and alluring. "I need your help." "What is it?" Yunruoyan immediately regretted her words, but she couldn't go back on her words. "I need you to help me distract the guards on the northern side of the hunting grounds. With your cultivation as a 7th-rank blade master, this should be a piece of cake for you," Liemo replied. 7th-rank blade masters were considered above-average cultivators, and the Imperial Guards were generally around 6th rank. Very few of them were above 7th rank. Yunruoyan had always been agile, and it wouldn't be difficult for her to distract the guards as long as she didn't clash with them. But when she recalled how helpless she had felt when he had snatched away her veil, she couldn't help but feel angry. She turned to look at Liemo. She wasn't interested in why the slaughtering king was so heavily injured, or why he was being pursued as an assassin. What she was interested in was the fact that the imperial family was so rich that they were willing to hand over a bottle of life quintessence pills. "Sure, but I'm not the type of person who makes a loss. If I help you, you'll have to pay me back." "Of course, I don't like owing favors either." Liemo removed a string of beads from his wrist and handed it to Yunruoyan. "Consider this your reward." Yunruoyan thought that it would be some sort of treasure, but when she took it, it turned out to be a string of wooden beads. She couldn't help but frown. Liemo saw her expression and continued, "If you don't like it, you can ask for something else. I'll have Xuanhuan deliver it to you another day." Yunruoyan touched the wooden beads in her hand. Something that the slaughtering king would wear on his wrist must be something extraordinary. "I'm afraid I'll just keep it for now." "No need, I'll take this," Yunruoyan replied. "I'll lure them away and you can find a chance to escape." She jumped down from the phoenix orchid tree. A gust of wind blew past, and the phoenix petals fell to the ground along with Yunruoyan's pink dress. Yunruoyan didn't stop for even a moment. Instead, she dashed toward the north, quickly disappearing from sight. Liemo looked in the direction that Yunruoyan had disappeared in and took off his hood. If Yunruoyan were to return at that moment, she would surely be shocked. The face that Liemo had revealed when he lifted his hood was clearly a completely different person from the one she had first seen in Yunruoyan's cottage. Liemo's lips curled up into a devilish smile. It was the same pair of eyes, the same cold gaze. However, instead of the luster of black pearls, they glowed with an icy blue light. "What an ugly piece of trash from the Yun family." As he spoke, blood dripped from the corner of his mouth once more. "Umph." Liemo snorted. "Old man, how dare you hurt me twice? I'll tear you to shreds." North of the hunting grounds, a group of 20 guards was patrolling the area. Yunruoyan was hiding in the crown of a phoenix tree, looking for an opportunity to escape. Just then, forebearers carrying a large palanquin slowly walked over. Surrounding the palanquin were 4 cultivators dressed in warriors' robes. Yunruoyan could tell that both of them were 7th-rank blade masters or above. Her gaze turned to the palanquin, and she saw a youth of 17 or 18 sitting in it. The youth was dressed in a bright yellow robe, and his features bore some resemblance to Li Qianhuan's, but he didn't have the same carefree air that Li Qianhuan had. "Your Highness." The guard ran up to the palanquin and cupped his fists. "You haven't caught the assassin yet? I really don't know what father is paying you for." The youth sat upright on the palanquin, his face full of anger. "My apologies. I'm incompetent." The guard looked down at the ground, not daring to refute the crown prince's reprimand. Just as the youth was about to continue berating the crown prince, an eagle's cry suddenly rang out from the sky. Everyone looked up. A black dot was flying over from the horizon, growing closer and closer until it turned into a large bird with the body of a bald eagle. A warrior stepped forward and whistled towards the sky. The huge bird circled the sky twice, then swooped down and landed on the warrior's arm guard. "Good boy, I'll be counting on you to catch the assassin today." Li Qianxiao caressed the bird's bald head. "Of all the presents my second brother gives me every year, you're my favorite. Perform well, and when you catch the assassin, I'll feed you your favorite human flesh." The bird seemed to be able to understand human speech, and it raised its head and let out a cheerful cry. Xuanhuan recognized it as a vulture, a domesticated beast. She had heard from her brother, Yun Maxiao, who was stationed in the army for many years, that these vultures were adept at tracking and killing. If they were fed human flesh, they would be a lethal weapon on the battlefield. Xuanhuan had wanted to hide in the phoenix orchid tree and wait for Li Qianxiao to leave before making her move. However, just as Li Qianxiao was about to leave, the vulture on the man's arm suddenly turned in the direction of Xuanhuan's hiding spot. Its red eyes seemed to be able to see through the dense canopy of the phoenix orchid tree and see Xuanhuan. Xuanhuan's heart skipped a beat before the vulture left the warrior's arm guard and charged in her direction. Chapter 61. Without any hesitation, Xuanhuan jumped down from the phoenix tree. The vulture dove headfirst into the crown of the phoenix orchid tree, but it missed. Its large body was bound by the branches of the phoenix orchid, and after a series of flops, it fell down like a rain of phoenix petals. Xuanhuan floated to the ground like a flower petal in a rain of petals. At the same time, Li Qianxiao, who was sitting on a nearby palanquin, saw her. "It's the assassin's over there." The captain of the guards immediately ordered his subordinates to capture Xuanhuan. "Protect the crown prince." The warrior who had been training the vulture shouted, and the 4 warriors by the crown prince's side quickly gathered around the palanquin. Xuanhuan was already surrounded by the 20 or so guards. Fortunately, she had covered her face with a handkerchief as soon as she landed, so that her identity wouldn't be exposed. "Surrender!" the captain of the guards shouted angrily. Without another word, Xuanhuan grabbed at the guard closest to her. The guard reacted quickly, stabbing at Xuanhuan with his sword. Just as Xuanhuan's palm was about to come into contact with the tip of the sword, she turned her hand into a finger, and spiritual energy surged between her fingers as she tapped the tip of the sword. This time, Xuanhuan had used almost 60% of her spiritual energy. Although the sword-wielding warrior was also a 6th-rank warrior, he hadn't expected that this petite, masked girl would be able to release spiritual energy from her body to attack. That was something only a peak 7th-rank warrior could do. He felt a huge surge of spiritual energy flow from the sword in his hand into his body, as if a needle had been stabbed into his heart. "Ah!" he screamed, and he couldn't help but let go of the sword in his hand. Xuanhuan caught the tip of the sword between her index and middle fingers, snatching it back into her own hands. Although she was surrounded by 20 guards, and there were even 4 warriors glaring at her from afar, Xuanhuan wasn't the slightest bit afraid. With the Feili blade and the bracelet's power, her safety was guaranteed. More importantly, she couldn't let anyone see her face. "You didn't seem like such a tough nut to crack," the captain of the guard said coldly. The guard captain looked at Xuanhuan and ordered coldly, "Brothers, let's attack together and chew her to pieces." More than 20 guards rushed forward, and in an instant, sword light flashed. Xuanhuan's pink dress fluttered in the sword light, her figure graceful and unruffled. Xuanhuan's talent for martial arts and cultivation had always been extremely high, but in her past life she hadn't been able to fully utilize her talent because of both her and the outside world. However, after her rebirth, this suppressed talent had instead exploded. Every time she fought, she seemed to be able to bring out her strongest strength. As a result, despite being surrounded by 25th-rank blade masters on average, Xuanhuan didn't show any signs of losing. Instead, she seemed to be gaining momentum. The warrior had already rescued the vulture from the phoenix orchid tree and returned to Li Qianxiao's side. Li Qianxiao turned to him and asked, do you think this woman is the assassin? Ada stroked the vulture's ruffled feathers as he replied, no, the assassin was a man with an extremely high level of cultivation. This woman should only be a 7th-rank blade master. Li Qianxiao narrowed his eyes and turned to another warrior beside him. Spread the word that I want her alive. A tall, skinny warrior immediately shouted out the order. The 20 warriors surrounding Xuanhuan all cursed inwardly when they heard this. The woman they had surrounded was clearly stronger than all of them. She held a steel sword in her hand, and although her swordsmanship wasn't particularly exquisite, her attacks were fast and accurate. Her face was covered by a veil, but her eyes shone brightly, as if she could see through every single one of their moves and gain the upper hand. However, this woman clearly didn't want to hurt anyone. She countered every move but didn't use any killing moves. Your Highness. De suddenly spoke up. These idiots aren't a match for her, so let's let the bald general go. Li Qianxiao thought for a moment before replying, let the bald general go, but don't let him scratch the beauty's face. A mysterious smile appeared on Ada's face. With a wave of his hand, the bald general eagerly spread its wings and flew off. Once it was high in the sky, it bared its sharp claws and swooped down toward Xuanhuan. Just as Xuanhuan was fighting the 20 guards to her heart's content, Qiuqiu's voice suddenly rang out in her head. Mistress, there's danger above us. Xuanhuan swung her sword, using spiritual energy to push back the 4 guards she was fighting. When she raised her head, she saw the bald eagle opening its claws and swooping down toward her. Phalai blade go. Xuanhuan's eyes shone, and the Phalai blade appeared in front of her. With a single thought, the blade transformed into a streak of light that shot toward the bald eagle. A shrill eagle cry pierced through the air. Pft! The bald eagle was cleaved in two by the Phalai blade in midair, and a cloud of blood exploded. Aya, my bald general. Li Qianxiao slapped his thigh and cried out pitifully. Everyone was stunned by the scene in midair. What had just happened? This woman actually split a ferocious vulture into 2 with a single glance? Had this woman's cultivation already reached a level where she could use spiritual energy to kill from afar? The crowd stared at Xuanhuan for a moment, their gazes filled with fear. Xuanhuan didn't know what the crowd was thinking, but she felt that the Phalai blade had become even more nimble this time. Before her cultivation had increased, she had needed to use her fingers to control it, but now all she needed was a glance and a thought, and the Phalai blade would become an extension of her body. Qiuqiu could sense Xuanhuan's thoughts and explained, Mistress, the Phalai blade is a divine weapon, many times more powerful than a high-grade spiritual weapon. As your cultivation increases, it'll become more and more powerful, and this is only a small portion of its true power. Hearing Qiuqiu's words, Xuanhuan couldn't help but close her eyes, sensing the Phalai blade floating in her mind. Ada! Li Qianxiao opened his eyes in confusion. What happened just now? Your Highness, I didn't see it clearly either. Ada also opened his eyes in confusion. Mistress, while they're still in a daze, let's escape. Qiuqiu reminded. All right. Xuanhuan opened her eyes and nodded. She then leapt up and stepped on the shoulder of one of the guards. Her body was as light as a swallow as she leapt into the forest at the side. Captain, the guard whose sword Xuanhuan had snatched away asked softly, should we chase after her? The captain glanced at him and replied exasperatedly, if you want to chase after her, go after her. Ada looked in the direction that Xuanhuan had disappeared in, deep in thought. She was clearly only a 7th-rank blade master, so what was going on? Ada, look, what's that? Li Qianxiao pointed at a tree by the side of the forest. Go pick it up. Ada ran in the direction that Li Qianxiao had pointed and saw a thin lotus leaf-shaped veil hanging from a tree branch. Li Qianxiao took the thin veil and gently sniffed it. He was instantly intoxicated by the woman's faint fragrance. Ada, have my second brother find me another bald general. This time make sure it's more obedient. At the same time, Li Mo was hidden in the crown of another phoenix tree. He had seen everything that had just happened, and his icy blue eyes narrowed beneath his hood. After Xuanhuan's disturbance, the guards on the northern side immediately relaxed, and Li Mo easily left. Xuanhuan hurried back along the route that she had come from. Because the guards were all patrolling the perimeter, there weren't many guards patrolling the area. She ran as fast as she could and in less than 5 minutes she was back. Miss, where did you go? We were so worried about you. Shilan immediately ran up to Xuanhuan when she saw her mistress walk out of the forest. Where did you go? Xuanhuan asked. I'm just around here. Xilan scratched her head in confusion. Miss, where's that lotus leaf veil on your face? She had really been tricked. Xuanhuan ignored Xilan's question. Her eyes were filled with anger as she stared sharply at Yi Qianying and Yi Ruoyan. Yi Qianying twisted the handkerchief in her hand, unable to laugh. By her side, He Xiang's face was as white as a sheet. Ruoyan, where did you go? The Yun matriarch looked at Yun Ruoyan, her tone somewhat reproachful. Young Master Pei was afraid that you'd accidentally wandered into the forbidden hunting grounds, so he brought his servant to look for you. He still hasn't returned. Grandmother. Yun Ruoyan quickly walked up to the Yun matriarch and knelt on her knees, her voice choked with sobs. You have to give me justice. Hey, be good, speak slowly. What's going on? The Yun matriarch was startled by Yun Ruoyan's sudden movement. Yun Ruoyan raised her head from the Yun matriarch's knees, tears streaming down her cheeks. Grandmother, someone's trying to harm me. You have to give me justice. Who would dare? The Yun matriarch wiped away Yun Ruoyan's tears. Ruoyan, you're the sole wife-born daughter of the Yun family. Anyone who dares to harm you would be looking down on the Yun family. I'll definitely give you justice. In fact, the Yun matriarch's heart still ached for Yun Ruoyan. After all, she was her own daughter, but the previous Yun Ruoyan had been too disappointing, and it had been difficult for her to take on the mantle of a wife-born daughter. As a wife-born daughter of the Yun family, she had to be presentable, and she would be a huge bargaining chip for the Yun family in the future. In the past, Yun Ruoyan definitely wouldn't have been able to hold up this front. Although the Yun matriarch's heart ached for her, she had no choice but to abandon her in the face of the Yun family's interests. As a result, the Yun matriarch had turned a blind eye to Madame N and the others' attempts to harm Yun Ruoyan. But things were different now. At the very least, Yun Ruoyan's talent for cultivation had returned. The fact that, despite being expelled from the Yun family's academy, she had been able to earn the right to enter the imperial territory through her own efforts. Furthermore, she had brought back the saber-toothed tiger's beast core from the imperial territory, as well as the right to enter Kongming Academy. All of this had undoubtedly cemented her status as a wife-born granddaughter in the Yun matriarch's heart. Her granddaughter, who she had once abandoned and then relied on her own strength to stand up, was suddenly crying on her knees, begging her to stand up for her. The Yun matriarch's heart ached for Yun Ruoyan, and she felt that she owed her a great debt. She caressed Yun Ruoyan's face. In that instant, the birthmark on her face didn't seem so ugly anymore. Ruoyan, tell me who framed you. The Yun matriarch shouted. Yun Ruoyan turned to look at Yi Qianying and Yun Ruoyan. Without hesitation, she raised her hand and pointed at them. She was the one who framed me. Chapter 62. Sister Ruoyan, what are you talking about? Faced with Yun Ruoyan's accusation, Yi Qianying immediately sat up from her seat, an innocent expression on her face. Sister Ruoyan, what happened? There must be some misunderstanding. Misunderstanding? Yun Ruoyan smiled coldly. Do you dare say that you didn't harm me? I didn't. Yi Qianying walked to the Yun matriarch's side and knelt down, her tears flowing even more freely than Yun Ruoyan's. I've always been by grandmother's side and I haven't gone anywhere. Aunt Yun can testify to that. She turned to Yun Ruoyan, her face aggrieved. Sister Ruoyan, I've always respected you, so why would you slander me? We can talk about whether I'm slandering you or not. Yun Ruoyan looked her in the eye. I was doing fine in the forest when He Xiang suddenly came to find me, saying that Xilan had entered the forbidden hunting grounds by mistake and hadn't come out for a long time. Do you dare say that you didn't order He Xiang to do so? You entered the hunting grounds? The Yun matriarch exclaimed in shock. No. Yun Ruoyan shook her head. I only searched the outermost perimeter. I was so worried about Xilan that I really wanted to go into search, but I suddenly heard the guards shout that there was an assassin, and I was so scared that I came back. Good thing you didn't. The Yun matriarch sighed. The imperial hunting grounds are forbidden grounds on the Minghuang mountain. Without the emperor's permission, anyone who trespasses will be treated as an assassin and executed on the spot. Last year, a young miss of the Wang family had sneaked into the outer perimeter out of curiosity, only to be shot dead as an assassin. Although the Wang's heart ached for their daughter, they could only swallow their tears and thank the emperor for not treating them as assassins. Then they hastily buried their daughter's corpse, not even daring to hold a funeral. This incident had already spread like wildfire throughout the capital, so the Yun matriarch and Madame N thought that no one would go near the hunting grounds if they knew how dangerous it was. The Yun matriarch's gaze swept toward Yun Ruoyao and Yun Ruoyu. As for those who sneak in, they'll be severely punished. Grandmother, Sister Ruoyao and I didn't run around. We just walked around the area and we came back in the time it takes to brew a cup of tea, Yun Ruoyu said. The Yun matriarch's serious tone scared Xilan, who quickly knelt down beside her young miss. She said, "Old lady, Xilan has been collecting fresh phoenix flowers nearby. She has never been to that forbidden hunting ground at all. Sister Xiaolan can testify." "Yes, I'm gathering stamens with Xilan to make pillows for summer," said Xiaolan, who was beside the Yunshi. "Grandmother. Sister Qianying must have had Xiang lure me to the forbidden area on purpose. They're trying to kill me." Yun Ruoyan began to cry again. At this time Mrs. Lu's face has completely sunk. Usually there are some small framing and small punishments. Today he was going to get someone killed. How could this be? The first rule of the Yun family was not to abandon or harm one's siblings. It looked like he had been too indulgent in his daily life. Growing up from a small child to an adult, it seemed that if he didn't manage it properly, there would be a big mess. Xiang. The Yunshi's half-closed eyes suddenly widened as she looked at Xiang, whose face was as white as a sheet. How could she be like this? Didn't the young miss say that no one who entered the forbidden hunting ground would be able to come out alive? If the second miss were to be shot dead for trespassing, the Yun family wouldn't pursue the matter, and the matter would pass without anyone knowing. Then the young miss would marry into the Peis and she would rise with them. She had even hoped to be a concubine to Pei Zio in the future, and it wasn't impossible for her to become a concubine. But dreams were often short-lived, and when they shattered, they were especially tragic. Xiang. Yi Qianying saw that Xiang seemed to be in a daze, as if she hadn't heard the Yunshi's call. She reached out to pull on her trousers, then used her sharp fingernails to dig into Xiang's calf. Ah! Xiang was awakened by the sharp pain and she couldn't help but cry out. She looked up to see that everyone was looking at her, and she was so frightened that her legs turned to jelly. She knelt down with a thud, half of her body prostrating on the ground, trembling. The Yunshi looked angrily at Xiang's trembling back. "Look at you, I don't need to ask anything. Just tell me what happened." "Old madam." Xiang finally spoke in a trembling voice. It's the young miss." "Xiang, don't talk nonsense." Yi Qianying hurriedly interrupted Xiang. "I've always treated you well. When your mother was sick, I was the one who invited the doctor, and when your brother went to school, I was the one who paid for his tuition. Don't speak nonsense to frame me." Xiang's words were stuck in her throat. Her father had died early, her mother was in poor health, and her brother was weak. The whole family had been living off her monthly salary as a servant in the Yun family. She was finished, but what about her family? Xiang tilted her head slightly, looking at Yi Qianying with tears in her eyes. Yi Qianying's eyes were also filled with tears. She frowned at Xiang imperceptibly, pursing her lips. Thus the two of them came to an agreement. "Xiang, plotting against the young miss is a serious crime. Think carefully before you answer." Xiang's face was almost plastered to the ground, and her tears dripped down her cheeks and seeped into the stone floor. She closed her eyes and finally said, "The young miss didn't know anything and Xiang did it all herself." The Yun matriarch's face was still frighteningly dark, and Madame An didn't dare to say anything else. "Then tell me why you wanted to harm the second miss." "Because the young miss likes young Master Pei, but young Master Pei is close to the second miss," Xiang replied. "The young miss is kind but doesn't know how to fight for herself. All she can do is grieve in secret, and I couldn't stand it, so I thought of this method to harm the second miss." "Are you telling the truth?" The Yun matriarch looked at Xiang, glancing at Yi Qianying out of the corner of her eye. Seeing that she was still sobbing, she thought of her daughter, who had died a long time ago, and sighed inwardly. "Every word I say is the truth. I did it all. The young miss doesn't know anything." "What a bold girl." The Yun matriarch slammed her palm on the stone table, causing Yi Qianying, who was kneeling on the ground, to tremble in fear. "You even dared to plot against the young mistress, and in such a vicious manner at that. If we don't punish you severely, then the rules of the Yun family will really be useless." The Yun matriarch slowly rose from her stool, and Madame An and Xiaolan hurriedly supported her from either side. "Go back and get 30 strokes of the rod, and then decide whether you'll sell her or cripple her hand." On the Xuanhuan continent, masters had the right to sentence their servants to death. The Yun family had always been known for their leniency, so the Yun matriarch hadn't directly ordered Xiang to be beaten to death. However, such a punishment wasn't much different from being beaten to death. After 30 strokes of the rod, even if she didn't die, she would be crippled. If she were to be sold, she would be the lowest of prostitutes, and crippling her hand would be even worse. Her tendons would be cut off and she would be tossed onto the streets like an animal until she died. By this time, Xuanhuan had already been helped up by the Yun matriarch. Silly child, even if you care about your servants, you have to care about yourself first. Do you think that hunting ground is a place where you can go as you please? In the future, if you encounter something you can't handle on your own, come look for me. Don't do anything stupid on your own. Yes, I'll listen to you in the future, grandmother, Xuanhuan replied obediently. Grandmother. At this time, Xianxia, still kneeling on the ground, kowtowed to the Yun matriarch. Xiang has committed such a serious crime, and Xianxia is partly to blame for her lack of discipline. Please punish her, grandmother. Mother. Only then did Madame speak up. Xianxia is still young, and her heart is pure and kind. It's understandable that she isn't strict with her subordinates. Mother, please punish her lightly. That's right, grandmother. Yun Ruoyao and Yun Ruoyu also hurriedly pleaded. Xianxia definitely didn't want something like this to happen. Grandmother, please spare her sister this once. Yun Ruoyan laughed coldly in her heart. What a sisterly family. However, Yun Ruoyan understood her grandmother's feelings very well. Xianxia was the orphan daughter of the Yun matriarch, and she had lived in the Yun household since she was a child. The Yun matriarch had watched her grow up, so how could she bear to punish her so severely? Grandmother, since Sister Xianxia was also kept in the dark, I don't blame her. Please don't punish her, all right? Yun Ruoyan asked half coquettishly. Xianxia hadn't expected that Yun Ruoyan would plead on her behalf, and she looked at her in shock. The Yun matriarch looked at Yun Ruoyan, liking this granddaughter of hers more and more. She reached out and touched Yun Ruoyan's face. Although she still felt a little sad that Yun Ruoyan's face wasn't perfect, her pity gradually turned into pity. Finally, she looked at Xianxia, her eyes a little disappointed, but she still softened her tone. Go to the ancestral hall and kneel for a night. In the future, you'll have to discipline your servants more. Get up. Now that the matter had come to an end, the Yun matriarch no longer had any interest in admiring the flowers. Madame sent a few servants to search for Pei Zio, and once they found him, they could return home. Xiang was still sprawled on the ground, her legs so weak that she couldn't even stand up. She lay there like a pitiful dog. Yun Ruoyan looked down at her, and she couldn't help but think back to her past life. She had been locked up in the woodshed by Pei Zio, and every time Xiang came to bring her food, she would grab a handful of sand and mix it into her food right in front of her. Only fools are fit to eat sand. Her mocking laughter seemed to reverberate in Yun Ruoyan's ears. Second miss, you're ugly but your heart is dirty and your brain is stupid. How could you destroy such a good life tablet? Even I, a mere servant, can't compare to you. Slowly exhaling, Yun Ruoyan turned her gaze away, picked up a large, plump almond from the porcelain bowl on the table, and handed it to the Yun matriarch. With a cute smile on her face, she whispered, Grandmother, have a taste of this almond. I'll make you a cup of tea. As she stood up to pour tea, Yun Ruoyan felt quite a few gazes on her. Madame and Yun Ruoyao and the others couldn't help but feel a chill in their hearts, and they hurriedly averted their gazes. Yun Ruoyan sneered inwardly. This was only the beginning. Chapter 63. A short while later, Pei Zio was brought back by one of Madame Anne's servants. From afar, his gaze landed on Yun Ruoyan. In the pavilion, Yun Ruoyan was sitting diagonally by the Yun matriarch's side. Her pink dress seemed to blend into the phoenix orchid forest behind her, and her face was as white as the petals of a phoenix orchid. It was so pink and tender that one couldn't help but want to reach out and pinch her cheeks. Pei Zio couldn't help but rub his hands together as he quickly walked toward the pavilion. At this time, Yun Ruoyan and the Yun matriarch were talking about something with their heads close to each other. Both of them were smiling and they didn't seem to notice that someone was approaching. Pei Zio walked into the pavilion and was just about to ask Yun Ruoyan where she had gone when he suddenly saw a servant kneeling on the ground. Xianxia's maid. Why's there a servant kneeling here? He couldn't help but ask, looking toward Xianxia curiously. Xianxia's eyes were red as if she had just been crying. She opened her mouth slightly but in the end she didn't say Brother Ao. She made a mistake and the old madam is making her kneel as punishment. Madame replied. Because of his relationship with Xianxia, Pei Zio was quite familiar with Xiang. She was delicate and obedient, and every time she saw him she would blush slightly, making her look rather adorable. What did you do wrong? Pei Zio looked at Xiang shivering back, and his tone carried a hint of pity. Yun Ruoyu opened her mouth to speak. Ahem. The old madam coughed, interrupting her. She turned around, but without looking at Pei Zio she said coolly, "This is the Yun family's business. Young Master Pei, you don't have to worry about it." She had originally quite liked this handsome young master of the Pei family, but now that she looked at him again she felt that beneath his handsome appearance, there was a hint of a lecher in him. "I'm tired, so let's call it a day." The Yun matriarch extended a hand toward Yun Ruoyan. "Yes." Yun Ruoyan nodded, holding the Yun matriarch's arm as they walked out of the pavilion. When she passed by Pei Zio, he couldn't help but ask, "Ruoyan, I was worried that you'd accidentally trespassed on the hunting grounds. Thank goodness you're back. Where did you go?" "Thank you for your concern, young Master Pei, but you should ask Sister Qianying about this." When they returned to Peony's cottage, Xilan vividly described to Peony what had happened that day, starting from the carriage to the Yun matriarch's loving words for Yun Ruoyan. "This is the first time I've seen Miss act like a spoiled child." Xilan had a look of disbelief on her face. Then, with a hint of pride, she said to Peony, "As soon as our young Miss acts coquettishly, the old lady listens to everything she says." Xilan, enough. Yun Ruoyan couldn't bear to listen any longer. She lay down on the couch and turned to look at Xilan. "You can't say such things outside, understand?" Peony patted Xilan's forehead with a smile. "The old lady may look old and she doesn't seem to care much, but her heart's as clear as a mirror. How could she possibly listen to anyone else's words? You'd better watch your mouth or you'll cause trouble." Xilan stuck out her tongue then smiled. "I picked a lot of phoenix flowers today. The stamens can be used to make pastries, and the remaining petals can be used to make pillows. I'm going to pluck the stamens now." With that she skipped out of the room. Peony poured a cup of freshly brewed tea and handed it to Yun Ruoyan. "Miss, why did you spare Missy today?" In Peony's eyes, today was a perfect opportunity for her to slap the old lady in the face. Although Yun Ruoyan had slapped the old lady, it didn't seem to be enough, and she had only managed to kill Xiang. "It's not time yet." Yun Ruoyan took the tea and took a sip. Peony's eyes brightened. Was there still a chance if it wasn't time yet? In the past, it had always been others who plotted against Yun Ruoyan, and most of the time Yun Ruoyan had been meek and submissive. Until a few months ago, when Yi Qianying had stolen the old lady's jade ornament and framed Yun Ruoyan. It was at that time that Yun Ruoyan seemed to suddenly have an epiphany. Not only did she absolve herself of the crime, she even pointed out that Yi Qianying was the true thief. It was also at that time that Peony discovered that Yun Ruoyan had begun to change from the inside out. Madame seemed to have noticed Yun Ruoyan's change as well. Half a month ago, she would only send Ling Lan to report on Yun Ruoyan's condition. Now she would send someone to look for Ling Lan every few days. Was there going to be some sort of operation? And this time, Yun Ruoyan wouldn't be as meek and submissive as before. Yun Ruoyan looked at Peony's bright eyes, wanting to seduce her. "Peony, do you know what time I'm talking about?" Peony frowned. Even if Madame were to deal with Yun Ruoyan, wouldn't she be able to punish Missy? Moreover, according to Xilan, Missy had been punished today, so she would likely restrain herself for some time. After a long while, Peony shook her head. "I'm too slow-witted to think of anything." Yun Ruoyan handed the half-finished cup of tea back to Peony and lay back down on the couch. "That's when the old madam starts to hate her granddaughter. At that time, I might not even have to do anything but—" Yun Ruoyan closed her eyes midway through her sentence. Miss. Seeing that Yun Ruoyan was silent, Peony's breathing slowly calmed down. She stepped forward and called out to Yun Ruoyan. Once she was sure that Yun Ruoyan had fallen asleep, she quietly retreated. Today's battle with the 20 guards in the hunting grounds had left Yun Ruoyan somewhat exhausted. In addition, she had expended a large amount of her mental energy in order to sense the fire attribute in her spiritual energy. As soon as she lay down on her couch, she immediately felt drowsy. Moreover, she was in her own courtyard, and as soon as she lowered her guard, Yun Ruoyan actually fell asleep. Yun Ruoyan slept soundly, not even dreaming. At dinner, Peony came in to check on her. Seeing that she was still sound asleep, she didn't wake her, instead covering her with a thin blanket. The sky gradually darkened, and Yun Ruoyan's room was completely silent. Creak. The silence was broken by a soft creak as the back window opened again. A figure darker than the darkness of the night flew by like a gust of wind and landed on the ground. Limo's icy blue eyes glowed coldly in the dark. He stood quietly in front of her couch, looking down at her. Xiaoqiu was cultivating in the bracelet's pocket dimension when it suddenly sensed a powerful aura slowly approaching. It was very familiar with this aura. It was the slaughtering king from earlier in the day. Just as it was about to open its mouth to wake Xuanhuan up, a cold voice rang out in its mind. Xiaoqiu, long time no see. Xiaoqiu was startled. It was actually communicating telepathically. On the Xuanhuan continent, there was actually someone who could use their mental energy to penetrate the bracelet's seal and communicate directly with it. Who are you? Xiaoqiu used its own mental energy to ask. Little thing, not only do you have little strength left, have you even lost your memories? The cold voice didn't contain a trace of emotion. Xiaoqiu was even more shocked. You recognize me? Who are you? I'm your master. The emotionless voice finally took on a stern tone. My master died more than 10 years ago. Who are you and why are you impersonating him? Xiaoqiu continued. The son pays his father's debts, and the son avenges his father's wrongs. Naturally, his father's belongings should be inherited by his son. Xiaoqiu immediately stood up. You're the son of the Beast King. Your Sunemo. Ha. The cold voice let out a cold laugh and said, Little thing, you finally recognized me. Xiaoqiu stood up, its tone agitated. Sunemo, how did you become a king of the Li Kingdom? Liemo didn't answer Xiaoqiu's question. Instead he asked, What about you? How did you end up here? I thought you died with my father. Within the space within the bracelet, Xiaoqiu slowly sat down. Her two large amber eyes were covered with a layer of gray. Slowly, she began to recount the dust-laden past that no one in the world knew about. More than 10 years ago, the Beast King and I were surrounded by those old monsters. Because the Beast King had been ambushed, he was even less of a match for them. I was surrounded by the Taotai beast and the 4 beasts, and had no time to protect the Beast King. All I could do was watch as the Beast King slowly died under their attacks. Xiaoqiu closed its eyes sorrowfully, its usually cheerful voice filled with sorrow. I tried my best, but I wasn't a match for the Taotai beast and the 4 beasts. My soul was almost destroyed and I thought that I would die with the Beast King. But the long-browed monster didn't kill me. Instead he sealed me away, Xiaoqiu continued. When I woke up, I was sealed in this bracelet. My primordial spirit had many cracks, and my spiritual ocean was nearly destroyed. It took me nearly 10 years to recover to my current state. Xiaoqiu looked down at its small, round body, its tone bitter. However, if I want to return to my previous appearance, I must rely on my master's power. So, when my current master accidentally dripped her blood on the bracelet, I sucked her blood and willingly signed a blood contract with her. So, Sunemo, my current master is Xuanhuan. Xiaoqiu raised its round head. The Beast King was my previous master, but he has already died. With his death, the contract between us was automatically nullified. As such, I'm not the Beast King's possession, and you have no right to inherit me. Oh? So that's how it is. Limo's cold voice trailed off. It sounded like a bone-chilling winter wind brushing past one's face, sending a chill down one's spine. In the darkness of the night, his icy blue gaze fell upon the sleeping Xuanhuan. Gradually, his gaze became murderous. Xiaoqiu. His lips curled into a bloodthirsty smile, and his voice seemed to freeze the entire world. If I were to kill your new master, wouldn't you become an ownerless object? Sunemo, what are you doing? Don't. Xiaoqiu could feel Limo's murderous intent and hurriedly tried to stop him. However, Liemo had already raised his slender palm, and his fingers curled into claws. Sharp nails grew out of his fingers, and he clawed at Xuanhuan's heart. Chapter 64. In the bracelet's pocket dimension, Xiaoqiu had already covered its eyes, certain that Xuanhuan was doomed. As far as Xiaoqiu was concerned, no one could escape Limo's murderous intent. It had even given up on the idea of waking Xuanhuan up. Dying in her sleep was far better than waking up and facing death head-on. All it could do for Xuanhuan now was to remain silent. However, just as Limo's sharp nails were about to pierce Xuanhuan's heart, he suddenly stopped. His gaze was drawn to the string of wooden beads on Xuanhuan's wrist. That string of beads was the one he had given to Xuanhuan earlier in the day. At this moment, the beads were emitting a faint red glow. Liemo raised his brows, his icy blue eyes twinkling. That string of beads had been personally given to him by his father on his birthday when he was 6 years old. At the time, he had thought that the beads were very ordinary, just like any other string of wooden beads. However, the Beast King had told him that the beads were called qilin beads, made from thousand-year-old fusang wood wrapped around the beast core of a flame qilin. The beast core of a flame qilin contained extremely strong fire-attuned spiritual energy, so strong that even the Beast King couldn't absorb it. The only thing he could do was seal it with the fusang wood. The Beast King told Liemo that although no one could absorb this spiritual energy, wearing it for long periods of time would strengthen the wearer's fire-attuned spiritual energy, making it an excellent supplement for pillmasters. Ever since Liemo had put it on at the age of 6, he had never taken it off again. During the day, because he didn't have anything else on him, he had taken it off and given it to Xuanhuan as a reward, intending to retrieve it at night. However, to his surprise, the qilin beads that he had worn for more than a decade suddenly emitted a faint wave of spiritual energy on Xuanhuan's wrist. Just what was so special about this ugly girl from the Yun family? How could she cause the core of a flame qilin to ripple with spiritual energy? His immense curiosity temporarily suppressed the murderous intent in Limo's chest. He pulled back his hood and leaned over to observe Xuanhuan. In the darkness of the night, only the faint red glow of the qilin beads could be seen. The faint red light shone on Limo's face, revealing half of Xuanhuan's beautiful face to Limo's icy blue eyes. Liemo slowly closed his eyes, his brows relaxing. Just inches away from Xuanhuan, he took in a deep breath. It was as if he had smelled something wonderful, and he seemed to be enjoying it. That's right. This was the smell. The first time Liemo saw Xuanhuan, he had been mesmerized by the fragrance she emanated, and he couldn't help but want to get close to her. When he met her again in the Phoenix Orchid Forest during the day, it was still the same. That was why he kissed her twice involuntarily. Liemo himself was a little surprised. When had he become so thirsty for women? So that was how it was. Possessing a strange fragrance that could cause the inner core of a divine beast to fluctuate with spiritual energy, could it be that this ugly girl from the Yun family was the legendary human cauldron that hadn't appeared for 1,000 years? It's no wonder that such a potent poison couldn't kill you. Liemo couldn't help thinking. Even he would have been in big trouble if he had been poisoned by that poison. Most people would have died of ulceration, but Xuanhuan had only been disfigured and her cultivation restricted. Back then, Lin Yueme had died of ulceration all over her body, a gruesome sight to behold. In order to avoid gossip and protect the Yun family's reputation, the Yun family had hastily buried her. Xuanhuan's unique constitution had given her a strong resistance to poison, which was why she had managed to survive. However, her face and cultivation had still been disfigured by the poison. Human cauldrons were actually a term used by some leftist cultivators to refer to people with unique constitutions. Although these people had ordinary bodies, they were extremely talented in cultivation, and the bottlenecks that everyone would encounter in their cultivation wouldn't occur to them. If one were to dual cultivate with them, not only would they be able to increase their cultivation speed, but they could also borrow their strength to easily break through bottlenecks. This was why they were called human cauldrons. Liemo was currently at a bottleneck in his cultivation as a peak blade master. If he had the help of a human cauldron, it would be like adding wings to a tiger. The corners of Liemo's mouth curled up in delight, but then he frowned slightly. Unfortunately, this woman's cultivation was too low, and she wasn't qualified to dual cultivate with him. It seemed that not only couldn't he kill this ugly woman, he had to slowly nurture her. Liemo raised the hand that had been about to kill Xuanhuan, stuck out his slender middle finger and bit it lightly. A large drop of blood flowed out. With a flip of his hand, the drop of blood landed on the qilin bracelet on Xuanhuan's wrist. Then the red glow on the bracelet slowly receded until it completely dimmed. Within the pocket dimension, Xiaoqiu didn't know what Liemo was thinking, nor did it know that Xuanhuan was a human cauldron. It was just a little confused as to why Liemo hadn't made a move yet. At the same time, it was hoping that Liemo had changed his mind. When it felt Liemo drip his own blood into the qilin beads, it confirmed its suspicions. "Sunemo, do you not want to kill her anymore?" Xiaoqiu asked tentatively. "That's right," Liemo replied. Compared to his previous coldness, his tone now carried a hint of happiness. "I've changed my mind. Since you've already decided that she's your new mistress, I don't want to make things difficult for you." Liemo put on his cloak and suddenly turned to Xiaoqiu. "There are some things that might not be a good thing for your mistress to know. As long as you don't hurt her again, I won't tell her about you," Xiaoqiu promised. Liemo wasn't someone that it or Xuanhuan dared to provoke. "Good then," Liemo replied. Help her cultivate well, and I hope that you'll be able to return to your former self as soon as possible." He turned and dashed out of the window like a gust of wind. The Qilin bracelet and the bracelet were worn on Yun Ruoyan's left wrist. Compared to the bracelet's simplicity, the bracelet seemed so ordinary that it looked no different from a child's toy that could be found on the streets. But at this moment, the seal on the bracelet had been slightly cracked by Li Mo's beastkin blood. Traces of imperceptible fire-attuned spiritual energy began to seep into Yun Ruoyan's body. In her dreams, Yun Ruoyan suddenly felt her entire body warm up. Specks of red light danced in her mind, circling and floating. She entered a dreamscape of dancing fireflies. The next day Yun Ruoyan woke up at the crack of dawn. She felt as if her entire body had been bathed in the warmth of the sun, and it was indescribably comfortable. Ah! Yun Ruoyan sat up from the couch and stretched lazily, muttering to herself, "It's quite comfortable to slack off once in a while." Suddenly Qiuqiu's voice rang out in her mind. "Mistress, you're awake. Qiuqiu, you're up early today too." Yun Ruoyan smiled. As far as she was concerned, as long as she didn't speak to Qiuqiu, it would remain asleep. It would rarely greet her so early in the morning. "Mistress, do you feel any changes in your body?" Qiuqiu asked tentatively. "Changes?" Yun Ruoyan subconsciously lowered her head to make sure that nothing had changed. She touched her own face and then suddenly realized something. "I think my body feels warm and comfortable." Qiuqiu wasn't unfamiliar with the Qilin bracelet, but it had been sleeping when Li Mo had given it to Yun Ruoyan. Last night, when it felt Li Mo drip his blood onto the bracelet, it realized that Yun Ruoyan was wearing a string of beads. Upon closer inspection, it couldn't help but be shocked. It was the Qilin bracelet that the Beast King had given to Li Mo all those years ago. Qiuqiu couldn't understand Li Mo's actions, but it couldn't voice its doubts to Yun Ruoyan. "Mistress, feel for the fire attunement in your spiritual energy," Qiuqiu instructed. Yun Ruoyan's eyes lit up. Could it be that her cultivation these past few days had paid off? She hurriedly sat down on her bed. When she opened her eyes, they were filled with pleasant surprise. "Qiuqiu, I can feel the fire attunement in my spiritual energy," she cried out excitedly. In Lin Zainan's study, Yun Ruoyan stood quietly in the middle of the room. Her grandfather Lin Qingchen and Lin Qingxue all held their breaths as they looked at her. Yun Ruoyan had been standing there for 2 hours, and Lin Qingxue was getting impatient. She turned to look at Lin Qingchen and her grandfather. "Condensing spiritual fire isn't something that can be done in a day," Lin Zainan began. His voice was very soft and he wasn't speaking to Yun Ruoyan, but to Lin Qingchen and Lin Qingxue. "At first, I thought that it would take at least 3 years for Ruoyan to sense the fire attunement in her spiritual energy." Lin Zainan stroked his beard, trying his best to suppress his excitement. "But in just a few days she's already reached such a level." In the morning, Yun Ruoyan went to the Lin Manor and told Lin Zainan that she had sensed the fire attunement in her spiritual energy. Lin Zainan was shocked, delighted, and incredulous. He immediately taught Yun Ruoyan a set of techniques for condensing the fire attunement. Without another word, Yun Ruoyan began cultivating on the spot. "Remember this." Lin Zainan turned to his 2 granddaughters. "When it comes to cultivation, it's not just about talent, but also about diligence." The Lin sisters nodded in agreement. Yun Ruoyan cleared her mind of all distracting thoughts, focusing all her attention on the spiritual vortex in her dantian. At this time, apart from a large amount of spiritual energy from the heavens and the earth, there was also a small amount of red spiritual mist. This was what she had condensed according to the technique Lin Zainan had taught her. "Sister Ruoyan, it's moving," Lin Qingxue suddenly whispered, and the 3 girls couldn't help but focus even more. Yun Ruoyan raised her arms, palms facing each other, and traces of red mist seeped out of her palms. "That's a fire-attuned spiritual mist. Ruoyan's drawing it out of her body," Lin Zainan exclaimed. There were far too few opportunities to watch someone condense spiritual fire, especially during their first attempt. Both Lin Qingchen and Lin Qingxue kept their eyes wide open, not wanting to miss a single detail. The red mist swirled between Yun Ruoyan's palms, becoming smaller and smaller as it spun, and the faster it spun. Lin Zainan knew that Yun Ruoyan had reached a critical juncture in the process, and he couldn't help but feel nervous. His fingers, which were stroking his beard, gripped the tail of his beard tightly. Although Lin Qingchen and Lin Qingxue didn't know what stage Yun Ruoyan was at, they couldn't help but feel nervous when they saw the red mist swirling around Yun Ruoyan's palms like a whirlwind. Spiritual fire, spiritual fire. Lin Qingxue pointed at the flickering spark in Yun Ruoyan's palms, jumping up and down in excitement. Pfft. Amidst Lin Qingshue's excited cries, the flickering spark suddenly went out. Xuanhuan sighed deeply and looked at her three relatives, a tired smile on her face. "Grandfather, I can't," she exclaimed. Lin Zainan laughed heartily and strode forward, placing a large hand on Xuanhuan's shoulder. "Royan, you've already shocked me. Back then it took me 4 whole years to reach your level." Lin Zainan raised 4 fingers. "Then it took me another year to condense the spiritual flame. That's a total of 5 years. And you actually used it?" Lin Zainan raised 5 fingers, then curled 2. "You only used 3 days? If word of this got out, those old fellows in the pill-making world would be so shocked that their eyeballs would pop out." "Grandfather, please don't tell anyone," Xuanhuan hurriedly pleaded. "I know," Lin Zainan agreed. Xuanhuan didn't want to contribute her talent to the Yun family right now. "Sister Royan, don't worry, we won't tell anyone." Lin Qingxue and Lin Qingchen also walked to Xuanhuan's side, looking at her worshipfully. "Old Master, Miss Yun?" Lin Bo's voice came from outside the door. "The Yun family has sent someone to escort Miss Yun home." "What's going on?" Lin Zainan frowned. "They just arrived this morning." "What's the matter?" Lin Bo replied from outside. "The Yun family said that the Crown Prince will be visiting the Yun family as a guest soon, and they're sending everyone to welcome him." The Crown Prince was going to the Yun family. Xuanhuan couldn't help but recall the image of the youth in yellow robes on the palanquin that day. Chapter 65. Actually, Xuanhuan wasn't unfamiliar with the Crown Prince, Li Qianxiao. Perhaps because he was trying to win over the officials, or for some other reason, Li Qianxiao was the one who liked to visit the officials and nobles the most. Xuanhuan had seen him both before her rebirth and in her past life, but at that time she had been too shy to step foot in public. Most of the time she would hide behind the crowd or claim that she was ill. As a result, Xuanhuan was definitely a stranger to Li Qianxiao. "Humph." After hearing Uncle Lin's reply, Lin Zainan snorted in dissatisfaction. "That Yunlan has finally sharpened his eyes. The family members also know that they need you, the daughter of the first wife, to be present." In the past, the Yun family would surely have ignored Xuanhuan's existence. Now that they had sent someone to fetch her, however, it was clear that Xuanhuan's status in the Yun family had risen significantly. Xuanhuan, however, was neither happy nor angry. She knew very well that if she had any value, the Yun family would naturally value her. If she was useless, the Yun family would abandon her once more. This had nothing to do with kinship but with profit. "Grandfather." Xuanhuan turned to Lin Zainan. "In that case, I'll head back first. I'll come visit you when I'm free. Don't tire yourself out when you're cultivating. Your health is the most important, understand?" Lin Zainan reminded her. As soon as she left the study, Xuanhuan pulled on Lin Qingchen. "Qingchen, do you have any more of those gauze veils?" Actually, Lin Qingchen had wanted to ask her why she hadn't brought any, and whether it was uncomfortable to wear, but Xuanhuan had asked for them first. "Yes." Lin Qingchen took out a dozen pieces of gauze. Xuanhuan took them in her hands. There were 7 pieces of gauze in total, all of the colors of the rainbow, and they were all in different shapes. Not only were there lotus leaves, but there were also bamboo leaves, lotus flowers, peach blossoms, and phoenix flowers. "Wow, they're so pretty." Lin Qingxue also ran over to join in the fun. "Sister Qingchen, you're so biased. You bought something nice for Sister Royan but not me." Lin Qingchen ignored her words, but Xuanhuan smiled. "Your complexion is rosy and radiant, so why are you wearing this?" Lin Qingxue took a peach blossom gauze from Xuanhuan's hands and placed it on her own face. As soon as she put on the veil, Lin Qingxue's round face immediately turned into an oval face. Her facial features were beautiful, and with this kind of makeup, it really made her look more beautiful. Xuanhuan couldn't help but compliment her. "This is called concealing one's face like a pipa," she said smugly. "It's very popular among the girls of the large clans." "Popular? What do you mean?" Lin Qingchen asked curiously. Xuanhuan also looked at Lin Qingxue curiously. "Suck." Lin Qingxue sighed and looked at her 2 sisters helplessly. "One of you reads books all day while the other cultivates all day. I'm the only one who can tell you what happens on the streets." As it turned out, the owner of a ready-made clothing business had been admiring the flowers on the Phoenix Mountain when he happened to see a young miss dressed in such a fashion. That young miss was so beautiful that he was inspired to make a lot of gauze and sell it. Unexpectedly, his business was so good that customers had to queue up to have it custom-made. Yun Ruoyan and Lin Qingqian glanced at each other in disbelief. That beautiful young miss must have been none other than Yun Ruoyan. And the shop owner wasn't suddenly inspired, he was clearly plagiarizing her. However, Yun Ruoyan and Lin Qingqian didn't take such a trivial matter to heart, and they simply laughed it off. Only after Yun Ruoyan and Lin Qingqian had walked far away did Lin Qingxue react. That's not right. If they didn't know about this, where did they buy so much gauze? After returning from the Lin Manor, Yun Ruoyan didn't return to her rooms. Instead, she went straight to the guest hall. In the hall, all of the women present had changed into more formal attire, except of course for Yun Ruoyan who had just entered. The Li Kingdom valued etiquette, and they were particularly particular about their attire, especially for the nobility. Their attire was generally divided into two types. Casual attire such as the gauze dress that Yun Ruoyan was wearing at the moment for ease of movement. The other kind was formal attire, which was worn during festivals or when meeting important people. It was very grand, complicated, and gorgeous at the same time. Yun Ruoyan looked around and the hall was filled with vibrant colors. Yun Ruoyao, Yi Qianying, and the others didn't need to be mentioned. Even Yun Ruoyan's grandmother was dressed in a sapphire pleated skirt, a phoenix hairpin in her hair. She looked hale and hearty, a far cry from her usual snoozing appearance. Ruoyan, why did you come dressed like that? Madame An was dressed in a peony red gown, with peony petals embroidered on the hem of her skirt with gold thread. She looked Yun Ruoyan up and down, then chastised her. As the wife-born daughter of the Yun family, don't you know how to treat guests? Yun Ruoyan naturally knew how to treat guests, but as the wife-born daughter of the Yun family, her wardrobe was quite shabby. In these few short months, Yun Ruoyan had grown half a head taller, and the clothes that she didn't have in the first place were now almost unbearable. Even the casual attire she was wearing these days was Lin Yuemei's clothes, which she had brought from the Lins. At the beginning, Xilan had prepared 2 sets of clothes for Yun Ruoyan, but Yun Ruoyan didn't want her to attract too much attention, so she didn't let her make any more. Mother, I've grown quite a bit during this time, and I can't even wear my formal attire anymore. Why don't I feign illness and refuse to see guests today? It was rare for Yun Ruoyan to say something that Madame An liked to hear. Madame An was just about to tell her to go home and rest when the Yun matriarch interjected, "Of course not. You're the wife-born daughter of the Yun family, and how could you be absent from such an important event as welcoming the crown prince?" Xiaolan, the Yun matriarch instructed. Take the second miss to change into the formal attire I've prepared for her. Yun Ruoyan hadn't expected her grandmother to prepare clothes for her. Although she didn't want to see the crown prince, she had no choice. Despite her reluctance, she still put on a happy expression. Thank you, grandmother. You're the best. Alright, go on, go on. The Yun matriarch smiled. The formal attire was quite troublesome to put on, but with Xiaolan's help, it didn't take long for Yun Ruoyan to look completely new. When Yun Ruoyan walked into the main hall with Xiaolan's support, everyone was stunned, especially Yun Lan, who had only just entered and sat down. In that instant, he almost thought that his beautiful ex-wife had come back to life. Yun Ruoyan wore a red waistcoat embroidered with a golden phoenix flower, paired with a matching wide-sleeved silk shirt, and a long pleated skirt with a phoenix flower on it. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun at the back of her head, and there was a golden dangling ornament with a ruby dangling from it. Her face wasn't overly adorned, save for a pink veil with phoenix petals on the right side of her face to hide her birthmark. Although she looked gorgeous, she didn't look burdensome, beautiful but not glaring. At the same time, her bearing as the wife-born daughter of a noble family was more than sufficient. The Yun matriarch was quite satisfied with the effect her eyes had on Yun Ruoyan, and she looked at her affectionately. Yun Lan's eyes flashed with a light that even he himself didn't understand. Yun Ruoyu, Yun Ruoyao, and Yi Qianying were all looking at Yun Ruoyan with admiration, jealousy, and hatred. What the hell? Madame An was a little shocked. It's too similar. It's as if that hateful woman has come back from the dead. Just then, a servant ran in and bowed to Yun Lan. Master, the crown prince is about to arrive. Only then did everyone look away from Yun Ruoyan. Yun Lan led the way to the main gates to await the crown prince's arrival. Not long after, a procession of 10 or so people arrived at the Yun manor, the crown prince, Li Qianxiao, riding in the middle of the procession. Yun Lan immediately went up to him and bowed, and the women followed suit. Official Yun, didn't I say that I was only here for a visit? Why do you have to make it so formal? Li Qianxiao dismounted from his horse and chided the crown prince. Yun Lan smiled. Your Highness, it's been half a year since you visited and I'm a little apprehensive. Please, Your Highness. Official Yun, please. Li Qianxiao led the way through the main door. Yun Ruoyan raised her head slightly. Li Qianxiao was dressed in a purplish gold robe, his hair tied up with a jade crown. He looked quite handsome and his bearing and etiquette were both extraordinary. When she thought back to the foppish youth she had seen lying on the palanquin in the hunting grounds, it was as if he were a completely different person. She couldn't help but sigh. There were many people in this world who would pretend to be one way in front of others and the other behind their backs, especially the members of the imperial family. Grandmother, how have you been recently? Li Qianxiao stopped by the Yun matriarch's side. As an honorary matriarch, the Yun matriarch didn't need to kneel and she only bowed slightly. Grandmother, thank you for your concern, Your Highness, the Yun matriarch replied. Li Qianxiao nodded. Just as he was about to continue walking, he caught sight of Yun Ruoyan, who was kneeling by the Yun matriarch's side. Who's this young lady? Why does she look so unfamiliar? Yun Ruoyan hadn't expected Li Qianxiao to suddenly ask such a question and she froze. The Yun matriarch hurriedly replied, "This is the eldest daughter of the Yun family, Yun Ruoyan." She then reached out to help Yun Ruoyan up. Ruoyan, quickly pay your respects to the crown prince. Yun Ruoyan frowned slightly. After confirming that no one had seen her face that day in the Phoenix Forest, she calmed down and bowed. Ruoyan pays her respects to Your Highness. Greetings, Your Highness. Yun Ruoyan. Li Qianxiao repeated the name, deep in thought. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, he began, "You're that?" Just then one of the servants behind Li Qianxiao suddenly coughed, interrupting Li Qianxiao's ugly daughter of the Yun clan. Li Qianxiao turned back slightly, then continued, "So you're the eldest daughter of the Yun family. I've come to the Yun manor many times, but I've never seen you before. Raise your head and let me have a look." Yun Ruoyan pursed her lips and slowly raised her head. Li Qianxiao's eyes lit up as a beautiful face appeared in front of him. He stared blankly for a moment, then suddenly pointed at the phoenix petal veil on Yun Ruoyan's right cheek. "It's you? You're the masked girl who barged into the hunting grounds that day. You're tuning in to the Sword Dance in the Vast Sky YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.